Hey guys, we're gonna sew a coat today. Excited to see you guys. We're gonna wait just a couple minutes for everybody to get on. Have a few cameras set up today, as you can see on the screen. We got 3 different angles going on, so we can actually sew this together. So probably gonna need some grace going from camera to camera, trying to figure all this out. We're gonna be sewing the, it's a simplicity pattern. And I know Adriana has all the information that she'll put on the screen once people pop on, but it's one of the Know Me by Mimi G patterns. It's a really cool coat. So we'll talk about all those specifics. I'm just going to see if there's any comments. See you guys coming on. Well, looks like everyone from Ohio is here. Hey, Mary. I'm excited to be here. We got this gorgeous, gorgeous glazed Vienna. Depending on whether I'm standing in the view of the camera or not, the lighting helps. My camera keeps trying to adjust for the colors, but this is one of those fabrics that changes in the light, no matter which way you have it. Sometimes it's almost like a rich berry color, and then sometimes it's looking brown. There's some undertones in there. But this is the Cherry Cola Glazed Vienna. We'll go over all those specifics once we actually get started. Shift this a little bit. Hey, Michelle. I was saying we've got 3 camera setups today because we're going to be sewing. We're actually going to be doing some live sewing and pressing. We don't often think about pressing with Cuddle, but with a coat like this, with a lot of apparel fabrics, it's important to kind of do some pressing. So we've got a little pressing station set up, and we'll talk about how we can press with Cuddle. But again, pop in between the 3 cameras. I just hope I don't trip over anything because the studio is all set up with my lights and everything. So I'm looking over here toward my computer just to see if there's comments. And Mary's saying she loves the fabric, which it's really stunning. I had seen the pictures of the Cherry Cola Glazed Vienna before I could get my hands on it. And then they sent it to me, and I just was really surprised how much I love it. Such a beautiful, beautiful color. I can't stop petting it too. Because of course it's based on the Vienna fabric, which has those lines in it, the straight vertical lines, and then even the regular Vienna, not just the glazed, has a subtlety of color. Like there's some different colors in it, which make it just one of my absolute favorite fabrics. So soft, and even the regular Vienna has, depending on how you look at it, it can look a little different. We're going to actually be doing some step outs today because sewing a coat takes a long time. It's not hard. This is not my pattern, not one of my patterns, but we'll talk about it. But even the steps are not difficult. They're pretty easy, but it just takes a long time because you're basically sewing 2 coats. You're sewing the outer and you're sewing the lining. So we just go step by step. And I usually, if I'm making it, I'll usually do the coat part one day and the lining another, or maybe the coat in the morning, lining in the afternoon, and then come back and put them together. Today, I have some step outs, so we're not doing all of it on camera. So you're not going to be here till midnight. But I just wanted to say the step outs that I did are actually in the regular Vienna. This is the espresso color. So it's this rich, rich brown that looks kind of black in some lights, but it's not. It's a brown. And it just has those beautiful, the different tones in it. And it's the same weight, the same softness. This just has a glazing on it that makes it extra special. The Cherry Cola Glazed Vienna is tricky to find right now. It is selling out like crazy. So I had this Vienna on hand, and so I thought for the step outs I would use that because it's going to be just as gorgeous. And as I was sewing this, I realized I really want a coat made out of just the regular Vienna. So what we decided was our prize today we're going to have 2 or 3 prizes. One for someone that has already shared the video prior to it starting. And then we're going to do 2 more for anyone who shares the video during this live. And the prize is going to be 3 yards of the Luxe Cuddle Vienna in this espresso color, which is 3 yards. That's a really nice prize, 3 yards of Luxe Cuddle. So it'll be in what you see our step outs made of, the coat we're making together. I'm sure you can try finding the cherry cola at your local quilt shop, or ask them to order it. But I know it keeps having to be reordered even by Shannon because it's high demand. And there's actually a French roast color too that's sort of a little bit more brown in the glazed, and that one's just been flying off the shelves too. They're really, really gorgeous colors. All right, I think we're gonna get started. So I'm Ajaire. I run Cuddle Ajaire, and I have a design company, Designs by Cuddle Ajaire. I primarily have children's clothing patterns, but I do have some housewares, and I'm working on my blocks for adults. I do not have a coat pattern yet, but I'm working on it. I know I told you guys that last time, but we wanted to really sew a coat with you. And so we looked for some patterns that we thought would look nice with the Cuddle. And we picked this simplicity one. So I'm just going to show real quick, this is the cover. It's a bad printout and it's probably going to be blurry for you guys. But it's a nice long coat. And there's 2 different lengths. There's an A and a B, and we went with the A, which is a little bit shorter, but as you can see, you can't even see the full length of the coat here. It's down to like here. It's a beautiful long coat. It's probably about knee length, I believe, this A size. So it's the Know Me by Mimi G, which is a Simplicity brand, ME 2103. And it's Know Me 2103. Again, I didn't write this pattern. And I do have several coat patterns, but not in adult sizes. So as I was going through the pattern, I really liked how it all came together. And I thought there were some really nice, simple lines that would show off these vertical lines here. There are a couple of things that I didn't do, and I want to just quickly go over those so that you guys can know just some of the differences if you purchase the pattern. We aren't sponsored by this at all, but the pattern is available on simplicity.com right now. And I think through today, I noticed that it was only $4.99, which is a great price for a pattern. I like the Mimi G, the Know Me by Mimi G brand, because they do have quite a bit of sizing. They go from size 8 up to size 26. And remember, those are not going to be your standard ready to wear sizes. You've really got to check the measurements on these. Because I find that they're very off normally from just your basic ready-to-wear size. So do double check all the measurements on the back of the pattern, or again, you can get it on simplicity.com and it's a PDF. So that one I was able to just purchase online. This is in size 12. It's a good size for some people back at Shannon at the office if I send that to them so that we can take some nice pictures. So we did it in a size 12. The size I'm doing today is bigger. It's going to be size 24. I wanted to look at something on the higher end and show how they can compare at the end. I also took the pattern today and I shortened it. The only reason I shortened it to about like the sleeve length was so that when you're looking at the other views of the camera, we can kind of fit the whole pattern pieces in, and we're sewing shorter seams. So I'm not going to go through how I shortened it. That's not important. If you want a shorter coat, there's tons of great patterns out there and you could just get one of them. I only did it to this one because I wanted to show you guys these step outs. And I think the shorter length will look cute. I think it'll be really nice. But if you notice that the patterns look shorter and that the finished coat is shorter, that's why I took about 10 inches out of it. Really just so that we could fit it all on camera. The other changes I did make to the pattern that I think will be important with the Shannon fabric is right here, there's supposed to be a fisheye dart, which is one of those ones that kind of like brings the curve in. So it gives it a little more of a fitted look. What I didn't want was to take away from these straight lines here. And so I didn't want to mess with that too much. There is a dart. I do have a nice dart in here, so there is shaping. And you probably can't see it right now, but both sides and in the back have really nice princess seams. And so there's already a lot of shaping in this coat. It's really just, it's not just a flat oversized coat. It's really got some beautiful shaping anyway. So I took out, we did not do those seams, and I didn't do anything. I just did not sew that dart shut. So that didn't take any work, just left it off. I also did not do, there's supposed to be a chest welt pocket here. And I didn't want to fiddle with that too much. Again, I didn't want to take away from the letting this fabric shine. And the other thing I did not do is there's a flap that can go here. It looks like a pocket flap. There's not a pocket that it's flapping over. It's just a nice design, like a decoration. So I didn't add those on. This does have inseam pockets though, and that's part of the pattern too. So it's supposed to have an inseam pocket, but the pocket flap is just a nice feature, but I did not do that. So no fisheye dart, no chest pocket with the welt, and no pocket flaps. If I did it again, I might do the chest welt pocket on the inside in the lining and the facing. So you do have like kind of an extra pocket up there, and it wouldn't affect how it looks on the front of the coat. You'd still maintain those same lines. But those are the only real changes that I made to work with the Cuddle. And we'll go through how we can do some of the steps with Cuddle that you might not do with the whole coat. I'm also not going to do every single step in the pattern because, again, it would take us forever. And Simplicity on their YouTube does have a video for sewing this coat. It's a relatively new pattern. I think it was just released this spring, but I did see a video up there. And she does a couple things different to the pattern, but mostly follows the pattern itself. She may be the designer. It may have been the designer that did the video, but it's a great video. And so if you really do get stuck on a specific step that I don't go over, you could always look for that one on YouTube and check that one out. So, all right, let me think what we're going to start with. I think that we will start over on the sewing area. We'll see if we can get switched over to that camera. We're going to keep all three cameras up just so that we can kind of get through with the software, have everything working correctly. But we're going to focus where we need to focus at the time. So I think what we're going to do first is show you how I cut out some of these patterns. It's a little bit different than what we would normally do with Cuddle. We've probably shown you guys, I mean, I know we've shown you, you probably have seen videos before of cutting out Cuddle. And for apparel, I do a couple things different. So I'm just going to cut out one of the pieces. I've cut everything else out prior to this, so we're not cutting all day again. But this is the piece of that beautiful, oh, see in this light, see what it looks like? That it's kind of got a glare, but you can kind of see how it almost has some brown undertones there. Yeah, it looks so different in all the lights. Sorry, I got distracted by how pretty it is. But anyway, so I always cut from the back. Just try to make some room here. Slide that over. I'm getting a little bit of a glare off my machine, so I may try to see if I can get the camera to focus again. Usually it starts to focus after a minute. All right. Let's see if I can put something up there so it won't glare quite so hard. I don't want to be, as if I put, no, that's just doing it more. If I shift it a little bit. There we go. That's a little bit better. Okay. So I've got one of my pattern pieces. It's just pattern piece number 10. And what I do is this is the edge of the fabric. I'm only going to sew one layer, I mean, cut one layer at a time. Even if it's something that needs to be folded over, I would draw it on and cut it out. Cut it out in one layer. The cuddle can be thick, and so you don't want to accidentally have things shifting around by folding it over. You want to check the nap. Remember the nap, you want the whole coat nap to go in the same direction. So you want the nap to be facing down. And the way I did it was I had the pattern pieces, the grain line on the pattern pieces going down, and I would make sure that it's going down. So this one is, the nap's going in the down direction, like you would push it down to pet it. And then for sewing apparel, I don't even bother drawing it on. I just use something for a weight, and I don't have my weight here right now, but let's just use my tape dispenser. Put it down a weight. You can use lots of different pattern weights. They have those great cutting mats that have the magnets that attach to it that work great. I'm also going to use a rotary cutter. We don't normally use a rotary cutter when cutting cuddle. What do we normally use? We always talk about it. We talk about the micro serrated scissors. These are my Karen K. Buckleys, and I love them. So I'm just trying to get the glare to go away a bit. And I do love these. If you do not have a rotary cutter, especially one of the smaller ones like this, you certainly could trace out the pattern and cut it out with your scissors. It's going to take you longer, but I'm really adept with the rotary cutter, and you may not be. So it may take you longer to try to use a rotary cutter. But what we normally don't want to do is use a rotary cutter because it's going to cut off the edge of the nap here. And if we're doing something like a self-binding blanket, that could be a disaster because then you don't have the beautiful edge that you want to fold over, the raw edge. Like you can see here, I used a rotary cutter on this edge. And see how flat it is there? There's nothing really hanging over very much, that beautiful nap. So, but for this pattern has a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So there's 5/8 of an inch in there worth of nap that's still going to be there even if I cut the edge off. So there's no raw edges in this, and it's going to be so much faster just to cut it off with the rotary cutter. I also, like I said, I don't bother tracing it out, but you certainly could. I just feel very comfortable doing it this way, so this is how I do it. I don't cut out any of the notches. I'm going to mark those in later, and I just cut the basic outline. Now, because we've cut it with a rotary cutter, look, there's going to be a giant mess, right? I mean, that's what we always say, to use the blade or the micro serrated scissors. But all that means is that I normally would just kind of cut everything out carefully, use my vacuum, and then still put the pieces in a bag, take it to the dryer, run it through a dryer at no heat to get all of that fluff off the pieces. I actually normally throw the leftover piece in there too, so that I know when I go to put it away, it doesn't have all that fluff attached to it. But anyway, it's a little bit more messy, but I think it's a lot faster when you have tons and tons of apparel pieces to cut out, and you know that you're going to have all that nap hidden in the seam allowance. I'm going to just vacuum this up really quick, so hopefully cover your ears. I don't want to be too loud for you. Try to minimize the mess. Right. Sorry about the noise, but I just felt like we should minimize the mess there. Okay. And that's that Black & Decker vacuum that we all love that works so well to clean up the fluff. As you saw, it sucked up even one of the pieces, and that'll just pop right out later into the trash. It's no big deal. Or if you accidentally suck up your whole piece, you can just go back in and pull it out. It's not twisted around anything, which is really nice. Okay, so this is that number 10 piece. I've already cut it out. This piece needs interfacing. And interfacing is something we're going to use in apparel sewing quite a bit. We use the SF101. It's a Pellin product. There's other woven interfacings that I do like to use too, but in something like this, the SF101 is great. It's a good price point. It's not super duper expensive. And and it works really well. So this is iron on. There's like a bubbly side that has the glue on it. And oh, you know what? I cut out the wrong one. Let me cut out the other one. Well, I'll show you how to cut the nope, I don't have my interfacing back here. Let me cut the other one here. Hold on a second. Of course, I cut the wrong direction, because we're going to glue that on, well, not glue it, it glues itself onto the, we're going to take the interfacing, we're going to glue it onto there. So, yep, that's the right way. I did it exactly the wrong. Actually, you know what? I think I had it down the right way, and then I was talking and went the wrong way. So let's just do this really quick. What do we always say? That's how we know it's live, right? And this is really just to show you how I'm going to cut out and mark the patterns. This one does not have to be perfect because I actually have one already cut out that we're using in the coat today. But this will just help you see how we're gonna get that interfacing on there. All right, I'm gonna use that vacuum again one more time. Sorry guys, hold on. Okay. Okay, so that didn't take too long. And if you guys have questions today, I will be kind of pausing to look for questions. We're trying to get through all of this without taking too much time today. And I know there's some awesome Cuddle ambassadors out there watching, and I know they have pretty much all the same answers I would have, I would think. They're all great sewists and know what they're doing. So let's go over to the pressing table, and I'll show you how we're going to put this interfacing onto the piece. Let's see. See if Adriana can put up the pressing table. There we go. Okay, so this is my pressing area. Let's see, I think that's looking pretty clear. So we've got, this is the back side of the pattern piece number 10. Now you'll notice on the interfacing, I have actually cut out the notches from the pattern piece. So that I actually do cut out of the interfacing. I cut into it instead of making it stick up and out. I cut into it just so that I'm not wasting any interfacing. And I'm going to lie that down right there like that. And I want to spray it. You want to get this wet. The SF 101 instructions will tell you to wet it, but I don't want to tell you how long I took before I actually learned to wet it myself. So now I'm going to use my iron. I've got it on sort of the high end of the wool silk setting. So it's not on the absolute highest setting. It's probably not even the setting that Pellin will tell you to do an interfacing on, but I don't want to put too much heat on that cuddle. And depending on what type of Luxe Cuddle you're using, you could kind of press out even really like the really nice embossing and stuff. So you do have to be careful. I've pressed a ton out of this Vienna and the Cherry Cola, and I'm not worried about it. It's been very forgiving. Let me slide this over here. I know that's kind of going off screen. So I am going back and forth. Normally when you press, you just press down, but I don't want to press too hard on this Vienna. So I don't want to press out those beautiful lines. So I'm pressing and I'm using some steam, and we had it damp. And like I said, I've got that wool silk, higher than wool silk setting. And you're just going to kind of work your way over it. You're not pushing the fabric out. So you're not like pushing it down, but you are just sort of manipulating it. So this fabric will fluff right back up. It does not take out those beautiful lines that we have. And if you wanted to, you could just kind of throw it back into the no heat dryer to fluff up too at the end, but this works great. So now that is adhered to that. And then we can go back over to the sewing table area, and I'll show you how I mark. So it's important to make sure that you're marking all of the marks on an apparel pattern. Otherwise, you're going to get to steps and not even understand what they're doing, not know what notch is what. Adriana, can we get up to the sewing area? Perfect. So now we've got this piece that's already got the interfacing on it. Now you'll see where the notch is, that interfacing is actually notched out, which is really nice. It helps really notice the notches that way, but you're not cutting that cuddle fabric. So you're not taking anything away from the seam allowances there. So what I do, this is obviously the opposite side. You can see here the markings. What I do is I have one of those, it's called a crocodile probably because it's crocodile. And it's made by We Are Memory Keepers. You can get one at any, like most fabric stores would have them. What I like about it is that it has a big hole punch and a small hole punch here. This thing looks terrifying, but it does set snaps and all sorts of crazy things. But I like that it has the small and the large hole punch on either side, because what you'll see is in a pattern, you'll have large and small dots, and it's important to know which one's which. So with this, I can just go through and I see the large and I would just pop out the hole. So it's all popped out of the actual pattern. You do not use this on the fabric, but you're going to use it on all your pattern pieces. So that way you've got the little small hole and the big hole. What I've done in the past is use, like prick it with a pin, but then there's no real difference between the small and the large dots. And so much of the instructions talk about sewing to the small dot, doing something else at the large dot. So it's really helpful if you can pop out that whole hole. So when you've popped them out on the back, lo and behold, you can still see them. So I would line up the notches that I've cut out already of the interfacing. And then on this, because the interfacing takes it so well, I'm using this Clover water erasable marker. So if we get it wet, it goes right away. And then I would just mark them. I kind of like to mark a little bit if there's any left over of the notches, but I mark them right on the fabric. Now with this one, it's totally fine to use the pen. There are other pieces that don't get interfaced. So let's just pretend this is the right side. And this doesn't have interfacing on it. So this blue pen is not going to show up very well in this fabric. And it definitely won't show up well on that espresso I'm using, because that's got a much darker background. So what I use is, you can use chalk. There's Taylor's chalk. It kind of, like there's triangles of it like this. This is what mine looks like now. This white one is just a little nub, but I really like it. I think it works great. You can also use, not sure what I did with it. My Madame Sew, it's a, it does a whole line, which is really, oh, here it is. It's a Madame Sew chalk line, and it does an actual line. You can't really see it. And we'll use that when we do the dart later. You can use it for things like that. But since I don't need lines on this, I'm just going to use my regular chalk, and you can see how it shows up. So there's that. So I kind of chalk over the whole hole that's there, and then I'll chalk over this entire hole. And then let's see if you can see that. You can see that that's a small dot, and then that one is a larger dot. So you can still see them. And this will just wash right out too. And actually it kind of fades out over time, even without washing. So those are how you would take all of your pieces, and you're going to put any interfacing that's called for and mark the patterns. You want to do that all before you even start sewing. So like I said, these projects can take quite a bit of time, but I promise you that it's not hard. It's definitely doable, and the steps are pretty basic. This pattern walks you through things pretty well. So let's see, let's put that to the side. And then I think what we'll do next is one more thing I want to talk about with cutting out. So there's the inside of this pattern, the lining is uses the silky satin, and that's another Shannon fabric product. It's this gorgeous satin. You may have seen it before. A lot of times we'll use it as a beautiful ruffle on the edge of a blanket that's made with Cuddle, and it's a really nice, like you would pleat it or something on the edges, and it's just a really soft, nice lining. It's perfect for this. So this is the silky satin, And this is a solid, I can't remember what the color exactly is, but obviously it's a black, and it goes great with this. And it's really nice to sew with. Sometimes when I'm using a fabric like this, I worry about snagging and pinning too much. And I pinned through this like crazy and had no issues with it. Now, I do know that there are some Cuddle ambassadors out there today that have used it a lot more than I have. And so they may have some differing opinions, or they may have some better tips than I do on that. But I found it great to sew with. But anyway, with the lining, we're doing linings out of that silky satin. And on these pattern pieces, the way it comes, it tells you to cut out two. This is just the side front, for example. 2 of the fabric, 2 of the interfacing, and then 2 of the lining. This is for the side front. Now, once you've cut out the lining with this whole pattern piece, you'll find out later that the lining is actually going to be an inch shorter than the outer, because we're going to bag the bottom hem edge, and the hem is 1.5 inches. So we're going to turn under the coat lining, and the lining being shorter is going to lift it up. So what they tell you to do later is actually cut 1 inch off of this piece. But I just fold up 1 inch before I cut out the piece in the first place. That way you're not wasting any of that really nice silky satin. And I know that the piece numbers that I needed to do that with were 4, 7, 11, and 12. It's basically the side fronts, the side backs, and the 2 sleeve pieces. So those are the ones that are basically the same except for that inch, and they didn't bother to have a whole separate pattern piece for it. And they could have just put a line and said fold up for the lining, but anyway, it just saves 1 inch of your fabric, and we want to keep all that fabric we can, right? So those 4 pieces, I did the lining 1 inch shorter, so we didn't have to cut it off later. Let's see. So I want to make sure I'm telling you all the little things. Oh, one other thing on the front facing, which I've actually sewn the lining together on this one. So the front facing is already attached to the lining, but the facing is that part of the coat that is going to go kind of like here, but underneath. So it'll be underneath the main coat, so that when you have the coat edge, it's not showing the lining. It's showing this lovely fabric under there. So you always, in a lining, will have the very edge of the coat be made of the same main fabric. So this is the facing. And one thing we do need to mark on there is we mark up 1.5 inches from the bottom, because that's where we're going to sew later. And it mentions it in the pattern, but it doesn't tell you to mark it. And I feel like it's a lot easier to just mark it before it's sewn together. So I'm going to do that now and just show you what I do. So it's really just literally 1.5 inches up from this bottom edge of just the front facing. And luckily it's a piece that needs to be interfaced. So the blue pen wash looks great on it, shows up. And so that's just one more marking that, and I'll do it on both sides. I like to kind of get all these things done ahead of time, so that then when I get to the steps later, I'm not fiddling around with, what are they talking about there? What's going on? I just kind of can see what the future is going to be and have it already done. And then I can, put my rulers away and all that stuff. I don't have to worry about them. Okay. So one last piece of housekeeping before we can actually finally get started sewing. In talking about the bagged lining, how it's going to fit later, we know that the lining is going to sit up here. Let's say that this was all put together, and this main fabric from the front is going to fold up. And it's going to fold up along this hem allowance here. And the hem allowance of this is 1.5 inches. And what we're going to, because we've made those lining pieces shorter, they're going to fit exactly when we sew them together right there. So it's going to pull it up naturally. But what really helps is to make a hem crease here. And I like to press all of those ahead of time. I feel like it's a lot easier. This is basically a straight line in this one pattern piece. But once you start sewing all the pieces together, there's some like curviness a little bit because there is kind of a curvature to some of these pieces. So I find pressing these up ahead of time, it makes the fabric want to do that. And Cuddle, or the Luxe Cuddles that I've sewn with mostly, really accept that steam and accept that really well. And the fabric still looks great on the other side. So I'm going to show you real quick how I press up those hems. And like I said, I do it ahead of time before I start sewing. Adriana, if you want to go over to the pressing table again, I can show you what we do there. I just think it makes a big difference to do it now. We're front loading a lot of the work so that we're not having to deal with it later. I do use a pressing cloth. This is just an old sheet that actually it's looking pretty. I think my machine needs to be cleaned because it's leaving a little bit of brown on this, but better on this than on the fabric, right? So Dritz has a hem gauge that's great. It's a metal hem gauge that's called, I think it's Easy Hem, the Easy Hem gauge. And I have it somewhere, but I cannot possibly tell you where it went. So instead of using that, all I did was take a piece of cardstock. So this is a cardstock, and I just made a marking that was 1.5 inches up. So that's my hem for this pattern is 1.5 inches. So I made a marking across this whole thing. Like I said, the hem gauge is gorgeous and it's great and it's metal and works fantastic, but this, worked fine too. So what we'll do is we take all of the pieces that need to have the hem in them, and then we're just going to fold up along the edge of the fabric to where that line is and kind of meet the fabric. Now, again, I'll use this pressing cloth, and then I've kept it at the same setting that I showed you guys earlier, that wool silk setting. And again, just kind of press. I add a little bit of steam. You want to get some steam in there. Don't want to do too much heat. And then I use a tailor's clapper. So we've talked about a tailor's clapper before. It's basically just a block of wood. It helps keep the steam in a little bit longer. So you're not holding that hot iron on there, but you're still keeping the steam in. It gives a nice pressed edge there. So I'll often put that there and then kind of arrange the other end. Again, give it a little steam, a little press. And then move the block down. And you just kind of can pull this out. And then oftentimes what I'll do is when I'm done with this piece, I'll kind of just fold it in on itself, keeping that firm. So even as the steam starts to go away and it's cooling down, it's flat together like that. It'll really keep its shape so nicely later. And then you're not taking this big bulky coat and trying to press a crisp hem in it. It's so much easier to do it ahead of time. Okay, so I think that's all of the front loading that we have to do. I am going to jump in and we'll start sewing then. And again, I do have some pieces already done, so we're not sewing everything. But yeah, if we're back at the sewing table, that's perfect, Adriana. And let me grab my pieces that we're going to start with the front piece, which is the one actually you saw me just pressing. So this is the front of the coat. It's piece number 1. It's where we start. It's actually where the pattern starts as well. I'm going to grab my pattern pages just so I have them. I'm going to show you the front piece really quick. This looks crazy. When you look at this, it's going to be a little frightening because there's all of these lines in there. But you'll remember, we're not doing the fisheye dart, so we just ignore all that. We're also not doing this welt pocket up there, so ignore all that. The only thing we're concerned about here is this dart. We are going to keep that dart in because we want to keep the shape, and it would affect how the collar fits because that does fold over on the edge. The rest of these things do not affect the fit of any of the other pieces, so they were super easy to remove. So I have already marked out the dart on this. I'm going to show you how I pin that dart up. When you do a dart, you're going to pinch it on the wrong side towards you. You always, obviously, otherwise the dart would show on the outside. And there's lots of different ways to do it. Everyone kind of has their way. But with this fabric, remember the cuddle is being petted in this direction, so the nap is going that way. So I try to kind of run it along the table, so that way I'm not catching any fabric going the wrong direction up into this dart. So that's the point where we're going to get to. Those 2 dots there are where we're going to stop and start. So I try to line up the 2 small dots first. The way I do that is I kind of push in one side of the dot, and find the dot on the back. So now my pin is pushed through, kind of pinch it all together there, and then lock it in place. These are the clover pins that we love to use, those the sturdier ones. These are the ones, the flower heads that come in the little box. They're a little bit sturdier than some of the other ones, and the cuddle needs that heavier fabric. I mean, heavier weight pin. So we're trying to line up those 2 lines on either side. And what I do is I just kind of pinch it, push the pin through on one side and out the other, and I look on the other side and see if they're decently lined up. And I kind of go through. We're not going to do any double pinning or anything on this. This is just a dart. The dart basically gets hidden in this fabric. You see it a little bit, but you can kind of fluff up the stitches later if you want to. So I'm not worried about it being absolutely perfect, but it is important to get the bust shaping right. So you do want to have it. You just want it to be, kind of as accurate as you can be without going overboard. So I'm going to move my machine back over, slide this guy over so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. Let's see, hopefully everything's going to sew nicely here. Let's see that. And we're going to stitch this dart. I'm going to use a little bit of a lower setting than we normally would use with the cuddle. I'm going to go down to 2.8 millimeters. I have my 9014 stretch needle, as always. I'm actually using the Gutermann polyester thread just because it's what I had here. It's a black color that I like. But it is a polyester thread. You can use pretty much any good polyester thread. I'm going to start stitching right on the small dot that's up there. You may not be able to see it, but I promise you it's getting right there on that small dot. I'm going to take the pins out. You don't ever sew over a pin. And I also, as always, I'm going to use this by any stiletto. And the nice thing with this is it really can flatten down that fabric as we're sewing, and really helps to keep everything in line. Just make sure it's lined up. Okay, and what we're doing is we're actually stitching on the blue line. I'm going to back up a little bit. You could also lock the stitch. I'm using a Janome. It's a Janome Memory Craft 6600. It's a little bit of an older machine. Doesn't have a ton of bells and whistles, but it's really nice. It sews well. I've had this machine for a while, so it works great with Cuddle. But I don't love the lock stitch, so I don't use it very often. I usually kind of do backing up. So when I've stitched my dart, what I like to do is clip the threads a little bit long, and I'm going to tie it off. Some people do it, some people don't. Some say don't do it, especially with a coat like this that's already a little bit bulky. I'm not concerned about there being a teeny tiny little knot in here. And that way I know that the threads are just really nice and secure. Let's see here. So I'm going to just make a nice little knot. Let's see here. My mother's one of those that can sew, or not sew, can make a knot like just with her hands. Do you guys do that? I think she learned it in school. And by the time I was in school, we didn't have really a great home economics thing. So we didn't do it. And I watch her do it, and it's just like magic. She just like rolls it in her fingers and it's a knot. I have to actually do the like square knot with my 2 hands. But I bet some of you out there are like good enough to do it like that. I'm always so impressed by it. Okay, let's see. So that dart is done. And you can see there's like a little line in the fabric here, but it's not super dramatic. Like, see it there? We can fluff up those stitches. It looks pretty nice, actually. And then, Adriana, can we go over to the pressing table? I'm just going to show you how I press that dart. Oh, she's fast. So we're supposed to press the dart toward the front, which is toward this little tip here. So we're going to press from the back. I'm less worried about the pressing cloth because this interfacing is already on here. And I've just done this enough that I've kind of recognized it. Now, this point is supposed to kind of be aiming toward the bust. So what you don't want is to press this flat, flat, flat on the table. You're trying to kind of make a curve. Again, this is a coat. It's not some skin tight, woven shirt that you're trying to get. Well, no one wears a skin tight woven shirt, but you know what I mean. It's not something where the shaping is super duper important, but I just like to do things the correct way. So you're wanting to make a shape here. You're not wanting to kind of flatten that off. So I kind of press it with my hands, and then I'm going to give it some steam because it is kind of a fat little roll right here. So you do want to kind of press that flat because there is cuddle stuck in that. And that's fine. It's going to look nice from the outside. And like I said, we can fluff that up a little bit, but I'm trying to get it as flat as possible. You don't want that giant thing sticking out. Okay, that looks really nice. It's nicely pressed. All right, so that front piece has been sewn. Let's go back to the sewing table. The front dart's been sewn, and that's pretty much all we need to do on that piece. And now we're going to, oh, actually, nope, that's not true. We do need to reinforce this area here. So reinforce is just stitching along the actual seam line right at these dots because we're going to clip them. And so we want to just reinforce. So all that's doing is taking your regular stitch and you're doing it right at the seam. So it's not stabilizing or stay stitching, which you normally do within the seam allowance. This is right at the seam. And this is probably a good place to mention. I use this, this thing dangling off here is a laser. You can kind of see it on my hand. So many machines now come with them. And it just gives you a sight here to aim for. I have an off-market one. It's called the Vivilux. It's a rechargeable red 3-in-1 laser. And I've had it for a while. It's great because right now I don't have it plugged in. It's still working because it works off a little like rechargeable battery. When I have my machine in my normal spot, I just keep it plugged in all the time. But it's great because it gives a laser line. And what I have that aimed at right now is the 5/8 marking on my plate here, because this seam allowance for this coat is 5/8 of an inch. Now 5/8 of an inch is bigger than I normally do my seam allowances because I'm typically sewing children's clothing. And so 3/8 of an inch is great for them. But with an adult, a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance is fantastic because if you have to do any kind of modifications, which face it, most of us do need some sort of modifications on a pattern, slimming in the waist, widening the hips, whatever we need to do, you have that room in the seam allowance to work with. So we usually have a 5/8 of an inch. But 5/8 of an inch is way over here for me, and it can be hard to just eyeball it, especially with Cuddle. So I use that laser line to line everything up. So for this, what I'm going to do is just stitch. Again, this is just to secure that seam allowance there. It's right on the seam line, and it goes to the dot and just around the corner. And that's it. You don't have to do much, just a little bit, because we're going to clip that and you don't want it to be floppy. And with Cuddle, even with this stabilizer on here, even with the SF101 on there, it can still flop around a little bit. So I am going to clip to that dot. And then because it's Cuddle, I might have clipped some of that fluff. So I'm just going to take care of that now so it doesn't like get into my machine. All right. So now that that has been done, also I'm going to clip to that one too. That's just the one where the dart was. Okay. So now that we've done that, we're now going to sew the front to the side front. The side front goes right in here. This is that princess seam that we were talking about earlier. It gives really nice shaping to the coat. So it's got a nice shape there. So you don't really need a ton of darts. That bust dart is all you're going to need. This actually will have some bust shaping included in the design. Now, when I am sewing like a convex curve to a concave curve like this, I always like to have the convex one on the bottom. Everybody kind of does their own thing with this, but this is what works well for me. I feel like it's easier to kind of keep the curve following the line, again, in this case, the laser line. You could also have, there's little, those metal magnetic gauges and stuff that you can put on there, but I like having the curve follow the line and then this piece kind of doing the work on top of mimicking that. So one side I would do this way and the other side I would do the other way, if that makes sense, because I'm always going to want this side front curve to be on the bottom against the plate. But first we're going to kind of match up a few different parts. We're going to start by matching up this top edge there with where it's supposed to go in this opening there. That's this, like the sleeve opening there. And I kind of match them up with my fingers and stick a pin in there. Then I go right along very close to that one, and I'm going to put another pin in, but I'm putting it in at kind of a diagonal angle. So it's catching quite a bit of fabric. And the key here is that I'm catching that 5/8 of an inch seam. I want to make sure I'm securing that. That's the part we're trying to secure, because we're not stitching up here. We're not stitching over here. We're trying to make sure that part there is lining up. So I'm going to find my markings. There's a few markings on here that need to line up. So I kind of find those first. And then I'm securing at that 5/8 mark. There's another one here. And once I get these in place, I'll kind of fill in the gaps around, because there is some finagling with the curves there that can be done. And then I do the bottom hem. And both of these pieces already have that hem memory fold there that I pressed, which is really nice. It's nice having all that ahead of time. But here we just kind of fill in. I kind of take a pin. You'll see this isn't our normal, I've said this 1,000 times today, but I guess nothing is normal cuddle stuff when you're sewing apparel. Normally we would do the 2 rows of pinning. We do the double pinning, especially with the big bulky throws. But for apparel, I like to do this diagonal. So I'm diagonally kind of aiming at the machine, how I'm going to sew it, so I can take them out as I go. But it helps to catch at the seam line, and you're kind of catching, it's almost like you're doing the 2 rows of pinning, because you're catching what's behind it at the same time that you're catching what's in front of it. So as you're pulling them out, you can kind of pull them out slowly, and it's helping you there. But we fill in with pins. I still use a lot of pins with the silky satin as well. I found that helped a lot. I was afraid to use the pins at first, because I was afraid it was going to make holes in that beautiful fabric, but I did not find any snagging or holes, and more pinning was better than less pinning. So definitely recommend plenty of pins with that. Oh, someone says, oh, Faye says, to do the knot, you need to wet your fingers first. That's good. Maybe that was my issue. I think my mother's just magic, maybe. I tried it one time a couple years ago. I said, I bet I could YouTube that and I could figure out how to do that. And I kind of figured it out and kind of was able to do it, but I didn't do it enough. And then I forgot again. And I was just like, I think I'm one of those people that's not going to do it. I'm just going to have to I had to give that dream up. But I do think it's possible. So I'm going back in here and filling in. Remember, we're doing that. This is that concave curve is on a convex curve underneath. I always think with the cave is the one that's like a cave, and the vex is the other shape. I only think of it because of the cave. I don't know what teacher when mentioned that, but it's funny, the things that stick in your brain. But again, we keep that curved, the outside curved one on the bottom. So I'm going to now put this in the machine. Let's see how this goes. All right, so I've got my laser line lined up at that 5/8 of an inch mark. I'm sewing from the bottom to the top on this one only because I want that curve on the bottom. I don't care if I sew like on the other side, I would sew from the top down. So that part doesn't matter to me. It's really the shapes that matter to me. The other thing is you're going to want to kind of keep this stuff up on the table so it's not hanging off and causing a lot of weight pull. I'm using the By Any stiletto. There is some cuddle that the nap is sticking out here, but because the laser's on top, I can line it up with the edge of my fabric. So it's easy to kind of like get the stiletto to see where the edge of the fabric is and not that nap hanging over. And I go pretty quick, kind of taking the pins out as I go, rearranging things. I want always kind of checking underneath to make sure that nothing is bunching under there. Because it's kind of bulky on its own, you could be sewing, a big fold in the fabric and not realize. So you want to always kind of double check that you're not leaving some giant fold on the other side. So we're still in the straight area, kind of heading toward where we're going to start to curve in a second here. But I'm trying to keep that bottom piece as flat as possible against the plate. And we're going to follow the curve of that piece, and all the hard part's going to happen on top so we have control over it. So again, that piece I can feel here is flat on the bottom, and this here is all kind of bunching up. But if I use the stiletto at what is about that seam allowance, I'm just making sure that as I head into the machine, the edge of the fabric is at the laser line, which is the 5/8, and that the stiletto is pushing down at that seam line. And just pulling this fabric over, almost sew it over a pin. Good. And then again, I just lifting up, making sure that curve is flat. And then just keep going. Almost to the end here. Follow it right off the edge and then lock the edge. Okay. Clip my threads. This machine can clip threads, but again, I don't love the way it does it, so I just clip mine. Okay. So now we've got that side front, where are we? The side front seam here sewn in. And the nice thing about Cuddle is it just kind of hides in there. But we are going to press that seam. So we should go over to the pressing table. I think this one, I'm going to clip a little bit of this front here just because it's wanting to pull that curve. So I just clip. You could clip both sides, but it's not really necessary to clip both sides. I just like to clip the front. Just it's going to let that fall down nicer. I'm going to try to get out that extra nap so it's not making a mess. Okay. And then we're going to, again, I start the pressing of this on my tailor's ham because I want kind of a curve. It's not a super duper curve, so you could do it flat. I'm going to use the pressing cloth just because it does have that edge of Cuddle there. I just want to make sure I'm not doing any damage to the Cuddle. And then continue down here. And then once I get past the curve area, I will put it flat on the table and just do the rest that way. Okay. And then I'll press this over as well. And I have, as I mentioned, I have that hem allowance pressed in on that one end. But what I'll do is now that these two pieces are sewn together, I'm going to press at where they met at that seam. So look how easily those fall up exactly where they're supposed to go. They already know exactly where to go. So that seam that we just created there, I'm going to press that so it remembers where to go to. All we're doing is just telling that fabric where we're going to want it to wear, especially with something like Cuddle that's a little bit heavier. That coat's going to hang and it's going to want to pull at that hem, and having that crisp line there will just help it remember what we want it to do. Okay, so we've got that sewn to the front. I think my other one is already sewn together. Let me just check my pieces here. So I did some things. Yep, that one's already sewn together. So now we're going to move on to the back, which I've done some of the back too. Let's see. We're skipping a bunch of the pattern because we're not doing those welts, but we are going to come back over to the sewing. Let me see what we're doing. We're doing the back side. So we're going to do a back side the same way that we did the front side. I have the back seam put together. Adriana, do you want to put us up to the sewing one? So I have the back seam sewn together as the pattern states. I did one of the back left sides or back sides, and it has that same beautiful princess seam. So that same beautiful princess shaping. And on this one, I don't have any interfacing on these. The back does not need to be interfaced. We're only interfacing the front. The main reason for that is you want that front to be a little more crisp. You want, oh, someone's asking about the temperature of the iron. Yep, it's a low, I have it on wool silk, but it's at the high end of the wool silk. It takes more heat than you think it will. It's not going to wreck it. You can kind of just test some on your own. I've got the Aliso iron, but on the high end of that wool silk setting, it's worked great. And it worked great on the silky satin too. So it worked great for both of those. And I tested a whole bunch of different ones. Some are too hot, some are too cool and weren't doing anything. That's sort of what worked great on mine. And it also was able to secure the interfacing. So it was able to do all three of those things on the same setting. But because I don't have interfacing on these pieces, there is more chance that things are going to stretch a little bit because this fabric does, Cuddle does have a little bit of a stretch to it. So you just have to be a little bit more careful with it. Technically, I would say to use a stretch stitch when you're sewing these seams that don't have the interfacing, because that interfacing is non-stretch, it's a woven, and it really is going to hold things together. But I didn't. I just used a straight stitch, and time will tell. It may break on me. It may at some point need to be repaired. With kids' clothes, they're so rough on them that I normally just do the lightning bolt stitch. I don't want to do it here because it's like takes 2 or 3 times as long as it does a straight stitch, and we don't have tons of time. But consider that if you're making a Cuddle coat and you don't have an interface piece, you might want to use just that regular, it's the lightning bolt kind of like little zigzaggy one. And what I was saying about the front pieces being interfaced, we need that interface sort of on the collar section. You'll need it if you're going to put buttons or something on the front. So it's really just, they just have you interface the pieces in the front. Okay, so let's get this back side piece added on. We're going to do it the same way that we did the front. Oops, that's the sleeve. There are my pieces over here. Is this the one? Oh, that's a sleeve. Let's see what I did with it. Oh, here it is. Pieces everywhere. And again, I've already pressed the memory hem on this one. Did that ahead of time. So now this one is curved just like the other, curved in this direction. So I want this on the bottom. It probably doesn't make sense to put on the bottom because it's way like a smaller piece and this is so much bigger. But I think it's so much easier to have it go through the machine with the curve on the bottom. All right, so I'm just going to be lining up. I'm pinning it the same way as I pinned it for the parts that were interfaced. Get a few pins in there going. Sorry, this machine is really giving a glare. Hold on. Sorry about that. And then I'm going to do this end. That's sort of the sleeve opening. those going. Let's see. And then I'm matching some of these notches that I have on here. Same way we did with the side front. If you missed that part, you can always go back and rewatch these. They're up on YouTube and Facebook. They're saved there. Facebook Lives are saved there. So you can always go back and rewind if you need to. That pattern, like I said, I noticed that was on sale on the simplicity.com site until I think it was today. I do think today was the last day, but it was $4.99. That was a great price. We also have the giveaway. So if you haven't shared already, make sure you share this post. We have 3 yards of this gorgeous Vienna. So this is Vienna. It's not the glazed Vienna that the cherry cola that the coat is made out of, but this is still so luscious looking, and it's the espresso colorway that has, I mean, sometimes it's got, like, sometimes it's looking a little black, sometimes it looks a little brown. It's got some maybe reddish undertones in there. Something I'm not exactly sure. I know Julie and Diana would know all the specifics of it, but it's just beautiful. And it's going to make a gorgeous coat, the same as the glazed. But we're giving away 3 yards of it. So share. We're giving 2 3-yard cuts from anyone who shares now, and we also have a 3-yard cut from someone who shared prior to today. Shared the the announcement. So I'm going to sew this again. That side is going to be flat with the curve flat against. So now we're sewing from the top. Remember, we sewed from the bottom. Now we're sewing from the top. The stitch length that I'm using is 3.0. It depends on your machine. So 3 millimeters works good for me for this machine. This is a Janome with Cuddle. I don't want it to be too small because then it'll break. The stitches can break because the fabric will stretch. And I don't want it too big because I don't want any gaps in the stitching. You wouldn't want that with a coat, with a throw either, but I feel like sorry, I started a little bit too far away. I'm using my laser guide here to tell me where to start. And I was looking somewhere else. But 3.0 works pretty well. When I was doing just the silky satin, I dropped that down to, I think I went to 2.8 or so. I'm actually going to bump it up a little bit because I'm just sewing cuddle to cuddle right now. And so I just bumped it up to 3.3. It really depends on your machine. It's going to end up much narrower than that. Like, it's not going to end up, quite at 3.3 millimeters, but just checking the bottom to make sure it's not bulked under there. It's the stiletto to get that pillowiness taken care of. You don't want any pillows in there. Hopefully my sound isn't breaking up too much when run the machine. All right. So once you get the basics down, it's just a lot of sewing similar seams. Obviously, this side back is very similar to the side front, and so there's 4 altogether, plus the 4 that you would do with the lining, which I've already done. So it's a lot of sewing the same thing, but sewing coats is so rewarding in the end that it's worth it. Like I said, I usually kind of don't all just do it in one session. I'll take some time in between so you get a little bit of a break. Trim my things. And then on this one, I'm going to trim the back piece. So see how it's wanting to like pucker a little bit there? I'm going to just trim into the back curve. And then when we press, it'll release some of that. Get some of that fluff out there. And then I'm going to press this one over on the pressing table. Right, so we're going to press toward the side the same way we did with that front piece. Right, pressing cloth down. I'll give it some steam. Again, this is that wool silk setting, but with steam and on the high end of that. So it's probably not technically a wool silk setting, even though that's kind of where the dots are, but it's definitely got some heat to it for sure. And like I said, the Cuddle does a good job of really keeping that heat. It's works out well. I'm actually going to press this one open. It's going to lay so nicely open. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to press it open. And then I'm also going to press up this hem allowance, just like we did with the other one, because we want that seam that we just did, we want that to get pressed up. And as you notice, I'm not even getting out that hem guide, my piece of cardstock, because the pieces around it already are sitting exactly where they need to be. So it's really obvious where that seam line is supposed to come. So that's what's nice about just doing it ahead of time. You don't have to keep that tool with you the whole time. Well, it doesn't hurt to double check it, but I like to keep those going as I go along. Look at my steps real quick. I think we're going to move over to the sewing table again. I think we're doing the pockets. So there is a side seam pocket in this. We omitted the other pocket and the little pocket flap thing, but we are doing pockets. So, it's out of the way. Now the back is done with the sides and everything. So we're going to put pockets on. There are two pocket pieces that are cut out of the Cuddle and two pocket pieces that are cut out of the silky satin. The Cuddle pieces get attached to the back. The silky satin gets attached to the front. These pocket pieces look weird because they're cut off here. That is because I cut them off because I made this coat shorter. Remember I said I made the coat shorter to fit in this, took 10 inches off it. Well, the pocket pieces would have hung down too far. So I just made them like a silly shape, but they're usually curved here. It doesn't really matter for this application. I just thought it was better not to have them come down below the hemline and be fiddling around below. So you can ignore that. So what we're doing is there's 3 marks on each of the pocket pieces. There's a notch and then there's 2 dots. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of match those up. There's also a notch and 2 dots on the side seams. We're going to match the notch up first because that really just gets the pocket locked in place. And then I'm going to do that diagonal pin. Then I come up here. I'm going to try to get the large dots to meet up by pushing the pin through one of the centers of the dots and making sure it comes through the back at the center dot. It can take a few different tries to get that sometimes. I've done it so much that I'm pretty good at pinching it. Like I'll just kind of aim it and pinch it through. And then just get it through. These are just the pockets. It doesn't have to be exact. I just like to do things the right way. Put lots of pins in there. I've mentioned before that I don't love pinning. I've never been a big fan of pinning, but with Cuddle, I've learned the hard way. They just pin, 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 pin. Okay. So I'm going to stitch this. The pockets are being stitched at 3/8 of an inch here, so that they kind of sit inside the coat. They'll sit inside that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So for this, we're just going to sew this at 3/8 of an inch, which I know is the edge of my presser foot. So I'm just going to use that as my guide. So I'm not going to change the laser. The laser's still pointing to 5/8, but I'm just sewing at 3/8. So this is, just stitching Cuddle together, Cuddle to Cuddle. It can be tricky. Just want to make sure you're using the Biany stiletto that we use. It really helps guide the fabric through, pushes out the pillows, all that stuff. And lock the stitch. And then I do need to do the one on the other side. Should have done that one ahead of time, but let me just do it right now. So as you can see, you've got that nice pocket, nicely stitched in there. I'm going to do the one on the other side real quick. And yeah, someone mentioned they love this color. I do too. This is the color that is part of the giveaway. I originally got this espresso Vienna. I was going to make a nice big throw for my husband. He's pretty tall. So I got several yards of it to make a nice throw and surprise him. But surprise, I'm using it for this coat. I'm just kidding. I'll get more to make a nice throw for him for Christmas. There's plenty of time to get more, but I just saw that on my shelf and thought, oh, that would make such a beautiful coat. It was going to be tricky to get more of the cherry cola sent to me because, like I said, it's been flying off the shelves, that glazed cherry cola Vienna. So I said for this step out that we're doing here, I think the regular Vienna would be just as lovely. It's going to be gorgeous. It's such a perfect coat fabric. It really is. Those long vertical lines are going to make it look so nice. The glaze is a little something special, but before they came out with the glazed, I just have been madly in love with the Vienna. I think it's so pretty. All right, so I'm just going to sew this one in place. Oops. I almost did the 5/8 of an inch. I'm glad I was telling you guys what I was doing, because if I wasn't telling you, I would have done it. So remember, the pocket is stitched at 3/8 of an inch, not 5/8. So don't be like me. Stitch that in. All right. Let's get it going. All right. Try to speed up a little here. I know we're getting pretty long, but I want you guys to see this gorgeous coat. All right. Clip threads, and then we're going to stitch the sides of the front and back together with the pocket. So I'll show you how we pin that together. So we've got the two fronts, and then we've got the back. I'm going to put the back on the bottom. So this is the right side back piece and the pocket. So you see all that sticks out there. And we're going to attach of course I grabbed the wrong one. We're going to attach the right front side, and it has that silky satin pocket attached to it. So I already did that. So we're going to attach this whole side. It's a little tricky because it's wanting to slide off the table, but kind of what we were doing before. We're going to line up a certain points and then fill in with the pins at that diagonal. And then there's some markings here, like that's a mark. We will match those up. These dots that were here, they were also on, sorry, I'm trying to get the focus a little better. I was kind of standing in front of the camera. The dots that were on the pockets are also on the main fabric and on both sides. We're pulling the pocket out and matching up those dots. They're going to be outside of the pocket, because remember we stitched the pocket at 3/8 of an inch. So we're going to be stitching down to this dot, and it's outside of the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance that we did there. So I'm going to fill in more of these pins. And what you'll see is we actually are going to sew the side seams first to the dots, and then we're going to come back in and stitch the pocket. And I'll show you why when we get to it. But now I'm just going to pin the hem up to the pocket, so the other blue dot. Little circle. Again, pull the pockets out. We're trying to find that little dot. There we go. It's up here. The fabric wants to slide all over the place, right? Let's see where that dot is. It's right here and right there. Sometimes it helps to kind of, there we go. Now I'll put the pin through and see if we're even close. Almost. Again, you can kind of like line it up. There we go. All right. So then with your fingers, you're just going through the side back and the side front. You're not actually touching the pocket here. And so we'll fill in the pins, and then we're going to stitch this closed. Now this will be stitched at 5/8 of an inch. So we need to have that 5/8 of an inch again, not the 3/8 that we used for the actual little pocket. So we're stitching from the top of the side. Make sure my gauge is right. I'm going to start stitching. And then get this stitched down. Use my stiletto. And just like I did before, there's not a lot of curve with this seam right here, so it stitches pretty easy, but just kind of follow the laser. And we're going to go down to that blue dot. We're not actually going to do the pocket. Right, just there. Right to that blue dot, and I'm going to back stitch to secure the stitch. And then we're going to slide down, make sure the pockets are, again, out of the way over there. And we are going to stitch starting at this blue dot here. So it's the blue dot that was down below. We're going to start there. And we will lock the stitch. You can still see that laser line lines up. That's what's nice about that. It's called the Vivilux laser line. I know a lot of machines have it now. And if I get a new machine, I would definitely get it. Because I do use it a lot with Cuddle, with throws and stuff. It's nice to be able to line up that edge and not have to be able to see the plate, because often the pile goes over the plate. Okay, so we have everything sewn but the pocket. The pocket's still wide open there. So what we do is now we're going to pin around the pocket. I need to clip this thread in the back because remember I kind of lifted my foot and didn't break the thread. Okay, sorry about that. So I'm going to leave the Cuddle on the bottom and have the silky satin on the top. It's hard because all this wants to start to fall off the table. We're starting to get a coat, guys. It's coming together. All right, so I have these pockets on top of each other, nice and flat, and then I'm going to start to pin around. But this is where that blue dot was. I'm not going to stitch over this. I'm actually going to tuck that up and start stitching from right there where that seam allowance is. So I'm actually going to stitch on those pockets to that seam allowance there. So we're not stitching over that. That way this can be free in there and it's not going to lock up in the pocket. That seam allowance there. That's why we're not just stitching side, around, and side. It's giving that pocket opening a little bit of extra space in there to not flip out and not peekaboo all the time. So it's just an extra little tip to do it that way. We're just going to pin all the way around. Remember, I cut off the bottoms of these pockets because I made the coat shorter. So it's kind of an odd shape, but it'll still work as a great pocket. Kind of blocking that from you guys, but I'm doing the same style of kind of diagonal pinning that I did with just the Cuddle. This is obviously the silky satin and the Cuddle together now. But both fabrics, you really can't go wrong with doing a bunch of pinning. All right, so now to get into here, we're gonna do the same thing where we kind of lift this up a little bit there. Just sew into that spot there. And we are going to stitch the pocket itself with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So it still will have the 5/8 of an inch around here. It was just that one stitching to the side seam that we didn't use the full 5/8. So I'm going to lift up my presser foot to really get into this spot in there. That can be kind of tricky. Get in there. It's a great spot where I can use that laser because I can really see it there where I cannot see the plate at all. Right, lock the stitch, and then just stitch right around. All right. Now when you get to the corner, normally you would be sewing around a curve, but I have kind of this other shape, so I'm going to pivot. Normally you would just curve right around. Make sure the cuddle's not folding under. There. And then pivot again up to secure it into the side of this coat. We'll go right up to the side seam, close as we can get, just to kind of secure that in there. And back stitch. There we go. All right. So we got the pocket in. So now that it's a nice pocket. The front has the silky satin, the back has the cuddle, so it's nice and warm in there. I kind of fiddle around the edge and make sure I don't feel any holes where we connected it, because you don't want to accidentally put something in your pocket and there's a little hole, because remember we didn't go all the way to there, so you just want to double check that, and everything feels good to me. And it's a nice hidden side seam pocket, looks great. We'll press that later. I'm going to do the other pocket really quick. And then we can move on to putting the whole thing together, because we got the lining, we've got the main now. Once I get this pocket done, again, I'm going to leave the back on the bottom just because it is a little bit heavier now. So I'm going to leave it on the bottom, and I'm going to pin real quick, not be as careful as I normally am, just because I don't want to take more of your time than necessary. Adriana, I don't know if you have a picture of the cherry cola coat in person. I don't know if you wanted to flash to that at all, like while I'm pinning or whatever, people can kind of see. It's so beautiful in different lights. We took some pictures outside. Oh, yep, she's got it on the screen. So right now we've got those gorgeous fall colors in our yard, and my girlfriend Corinne, she came over, and she's the right size for the coat. It was perfect. So she took some pictures for me, and or I took some pictures of her, and it just looks so beautiful in the yard there. Like, that's a perfect fall color. I mean, I can see why that color is hard to keep in stock. It's just absolutely perfect for this really on-trend coat. Again, I think this espresso is just going to be just as gorgeous, and I've literally seen this color in coats this season. But oh, and this is another one. So this is another glazed cherry cola Vienna. It's a different coat pattern. This pattern actually is out of print. It's one that they sewed last year, and it was, I mean, just all the rage. Everyone was obsessed with this last year. So I had only seen pictures of that coat there, and fell in love with the fabric and couldn't believe when I saw it in person. Just, it's even better in person. You guys will die when you see it. Yeah, so I'm just going to sew. It's the same thing you guys just saw. I'm just trying to get this pocket in real quick. And then we can move on to the next step. This is just sewing the bottom part up to that dot. Not through the pockets yet. the dot and securing it. Then we're going to move down the other dot. Okay. Once in a while, I bump this little seam gauge. So, seam gauge. So I always want to double check that it's actually where it's supposed to be. There we go. That stitch. I know, right? Everybody's saying how beautiful that cherry cola is. It really is. It's just stunning. And all of the glazed colors are gorgeous. That French roast, oh, I have to get my hands on the French roast too. I think that's a really beautiful color. It's like a lighter brown, French roast, like a really lovely coffee. Right, almost there. Okay. All right. I'm just going to pin and stitch this pocket real quick. Make sure everything's lining up just right. Again, I'm going to stitch up to the previous stitching. I'm not going to stitch that seam allowance down there. Pinning quickly, so not taking normal amount of care, but I don't want to hang you guys up too long. I think the next step is putting the collar on, which seems like that would be really complicated, but they make it really simple. So we'll do that as soon as I'm done with this little pocket here. Just pin this in place. Ooh, there are the other colors of the glazed Vienna. Oh, so pretty. That blackberry would actually make a pretty coat too. I'm not a super purple person myself, but it's so beautiful. And it's a deep color, which I think would look great, especially if that's your thing. I think that would make a nice coat. Raindrop, I think, would make a gorgeous blanket. I don't know that I would make a coat out of raindrop, but again, if that's your thing, I'm not going to complain because it's a gorgeous fabric. Or at least I think that's a glazed raindrop. I just said that. I might be wrong, so don't quote me on that color. Almost just stitching this pocket around. Okay. Not even using the stiletto. I'm just trying to speed through this. It'll all get pressed out nicely anyway. We'll be okay. Make sure I don't stitch into the seam. Okay. Right up to there. All right. Clip the threads and then we'll move on to that next step, which I think is the that over. Okay. Whoops, that's my light just fell. Let me move that. Knock the light right down. There we go. I think my camera's good. Okay. Oh, you know what? Actually, before we have to sew the shoulder seam, but that's pretty quick too. So now we've got the front and the back. The sides are all sewn up. We would press the pocket toward the front and the seams open. I'm not going to do that right now because just for lack of time. But that's what you would do is you press the seams above and below the pocket open and toward the front. Just making sure I've got all the threads all clipped up. But normally I would press there. All right, so now what we need to do is attach the shoulders. Sorry, I'm trying to get this where you guys can see. All right, there's the back. Those are the shoulders. And now the two fronts, following the armhole, match up there. And these are just really easy straight shoulders. So I pin on one end, pin on the other end, and I always pin at a diagonal for this, aiming toward where the sewing machine is going to stitch. So I can pull them out. You've seen how I just pull them out pretty quickly. I agree, Jackie. The glazing just amps up the volume of the beautiful Vienna. Because again, the Vienna itself, the colors are just stunning in it. There's so much depth of color. It's not just a brown. It's beautiful on its own. And then they take the glazing and just really takes it to another level. I'm pinning both shoulders at once because we'll stitch them kind of both one and then move on to the next one. So I'm just pinning them in. It's not the most exciting step. It's just basically straight line. So it's nice. So you'll see I'm kind of holding this up on the table a bunch, trying to make sure my gauge is right. These are back to 5/8 of an inch again. If you keep the weight, oops, don't like how I was doing that. Thread was catching. Okay. So let's go back in. Grab my threads. Wanting to knot up there. There we go. All right. So I'll use the stiletto. Again, just making sure nothing's bunching up underneath. All right. So back stitch there, and now I'm going to move on to the other shoulder. I'm just going to kind of slide it over, right up. All right. This is where the stiletto helps. So here where I'm sewing the front shoulder to the back shoulder, the front is interfaced and the back is not. I have the back on the bottom against the feed dogs so that if there is any pulling or whatever, it's on that bottom one because this top is more stiff because it doesn't stretch. So I like anything that has a little bit of extra give to be on the bottom because the feed dogs will kind of help get it through without bulking up. So I am going to press really quickly the shoulder seams. I'm going to press them open. You go back to the pressing table. You don't have to use a tailor's hand for this, but it's just easy to get up and into there. Just press the seam open. Adriana, if you want to go to the pressing table, just kind of pressing that seam open and then pressing the other one open. The lining, I pressed both to the back because the shoulder has a facing in it that's a little bit bulky for that silky satin, so I pressed them to the back. But I'm not going to do that here. Okay, so I didn't press those side seams, so that's okay. Let's go back to the sewing machine. So now we'll do the collar. Let me find that collar piece. This is the collar piece, it's already stitched together. Remember, it was 2 pieces. This is the under collar. Piece number 10, that's the one that I showed you guys an example of earlier, but this is the real one. Gosh, that Vienna is so pretty on screen. I had to stop and look at it for a second. All right, so I think I need to stay stitch. Yep, you should really stay stitch this back. See how it can stretch here? I'm just going to stay stitch it really quickly. It says to stay stitch it, you know, from the shoulders. I'm just going to do 1/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to do a straight 1/8 of an inch stitch. Sorry, 1/8 of an inch seam allowance stitch, just to kind of get the fabric not to stretch too much. So I'm not following exactly what the instructions say to do here for the sake of time, but I am giving it a little bit of stability there at the neckline so the neckline doesn't pull open. It says to do it in a very specific, you know, direction, but I'm skipping that right now. If you have the pattern, you should probably follow it, but I'm skipping it this time. Okay, so this is the under collar. I am going to put the right sides together. I'm matching up the center seam of this under collar with the center back. This is the center back up here. And those are both 2 seams that are pressed open, so it's easier to line them up. And then I'll pin on both of the seam allowances so that I'm kind of pinning those seam allowances flat, so it'll stay flat on both sides. That way, it's not going to get super bulky at that seam. And then this one, we have dots that meet at the shoulder. So you remember, you're going to find the shoulder seam itself and match the dot to that down at the 5/8 of an inch mark. So you're not necessarily matching that dot because the seam is diagonal. You want to match where it meets the actual shoulder seam. So for this one, snip that stitch. All right, let me just double check. We're going to stitch under collar to neck to matching the dots. There's a small dot marking here I'm missing. I'm going to grab that pattern piece because I think I'm missing a dot. Here it is. That's 9. I want to make sure I've got the dots marked correctly. What did I do with that one piece we made? That was the extra piece. Sorry, guys. Oh, here it is. No, got it. Hold on, I just want to make sure I put this right. Stitch along there. To there. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. This is the notch on the front. So we've moved over to the front. We're past the shoulder seam at this point. And then we reinforce this on the front face, not front facing, the very front first. So that dot there is going to meet up with this blue dot here. So these are all the points that we need to match up. And I always do those first, and then fill in. Yeah, there we go. This makes sense now. This goes toward the front. There we go. That's because I see now. Because I snipped it. That's why. Okay. So I'm filling in with pins now. This is just attaching the under collar to the main coat. And really the stay stitching that I did, you would want to do with any fabric because as you're manipulating this collar onto it, you don't want the main fabric to get pulled and stretched out there. But with Cuddle, it already has stretch, so it's extra, you know, it's even more reason to really make sure that you are securing that in. Matching the shoulder seam. That was pressed open. So just matching all these dots and pinning this all on. And then I'm going to be stitching from dot to dot, just like those old books that we used to do. No, it doesn't seem like it, but we're getting there. We're getting close now. So we're getting the collar on. And then getting there. All right, so I'm going to start at this blue dot, and I'm stitching with the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure my gauge is right. All right. Just want to make sure as we go around this corner that everything is, see if you can see that okay. So there's some twisting and turning that we're doing here at the dots. And all I'm doing is making sure the bottom is not getting caught in it. The pivot there, that dot. There we go. I hit a pin. Use the stiletto. Just making sure that back fabric is not curling up. Slow down in this part just because that back fabric, it's on its own. It doesn't have any interfacing there. I want to make sure it's not going to curl up on itself so I can kind of feel it underneath. Just make sure. Here I'm going over the shoulders, the back, the center back seam, just kind of making sure that those seams are pressed open still so that that doesn't get super bulky there at the back of the neck. That would be where you would put kind of a tag, or if you wanted some sort of hanging loop or something. This kind of jacket is going to be hung up on a hanger, but if you wanted to put, a cute little tag or something, that's where you would put it. Well, actually, that's a lie. You would put it in the lining at that point. So not here. That would be on the outside of your coat. That's right. It would be on the lining. Almost done with this. Let's just pivot. The thing I like about the laser is when you pivot, you can really see that you're in the right spot. All right. So let's come out and see how we did. This is one of those situations where you're not seeing what's happening underneath. So if things get mangled at all, you might have to kind of go back and fix up the stitching. You want to make sure you're getting through the dots correctly. Nothing's been left open. So right here, a little bit too much there. So I'm going to flip it onto this side where I can see the dot there and really stitch right through there. I don't think that would leave a hole, but I don't want to chance it. So I'm just going to stitch right one more time there, kind of catching that. The nice thing about Cuddle is that it kind of hides any kind of mistakes that you might make. It's very forgiving because of that nap on the front. It kind of fluffs up and hides everything. So any little mistakes that you make, just kind of a little bit of a bubble there. So I'm going to release that and then stitch that down too. That was on the back. That was actually where I didn't stay stitch, even though it's interfaced. So as I was rushing through, I didn't stay stitch it and bubbled up a little bit. So these are all just the things you can encounter, but you just fix them. All right, so that's fixed. Then a 5/8. Let's look at the collar. This is the under collar. This is the part that's going to go down when the collar's on. But you just want to make sure that seam is nice and smooth. There's no holes as you're you know, kind of that's the thing with cuddles. You really have to like feel for a hole because you wouldn't see it even if there was one. Um, you know, at these shoulder seams, I just kind of rub my fingers around it and look. Um, I think I this says to trim the seam. I don't do that because I am going to stitch the the lining and main seams together here inside the coat later, just to so that they don't flop around. I like having something to grab onto, so I'm not going to trim that seam. But now we're going to put the sleeves in. I've already put the sleeves in the lining, but we're going to put the sleeves in the main coat. Okay, so one thing with this pattern is that it has a two-piece sleeve, which is really nice for a coat because it gives you more movement. It gives some more flexibility in your movement. But I don't think it was originally designed as a two-piece sleeve because the back of the coat, as you've seen, has, Adriana, I don't know if you can flip to the main camera for a second. I just want to show something on the back of the coat. Turn it around and see if we can see. Okay. So I don't know how well you'll be able to see these lines, but you got the princess seams here. Well, this two-piece sleeve, it's hard to see. Where is the seam? It's even hard to tell where the seam is. All right, so the seam right here should meet this princess seam. That's just how you would normally design it. It should like flow nicely. Now, with this, it's not super noticeable. So what I did was, and this was actually, I'd already done it, but then when I looked at that video that Simplicity has on their site for sewing the coat, she actually mentioned it. And so she did something different than normal that you would do with the sleeve. So this is the sleeve. Right here is the other piece, the seam ends here. And then this is the princess seam. This is sewing the sleeve as is, how the pattern says to do it. This one is a little bit nicer having that match up, is how she mentioned to do it. And it's kind of what I did before I even saw that she mentioned to do it. So if we go back over, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Normally in a sleeve, you need some wearing ease in it. You want it to be comfortable, especially because it's a big, heavy winter coat and you're going to be wearing, you know, sweaters and stuff under it. So you need to have some ease. And normally that's in the cap here. So normally the cap of a sleeve has ease factored in. And at the seam line, so where you're stitching, should actually properly fit the armhole, but all this won't necessarily. And so you would kind of do some gathering stitches here to just slightly pull enough here that as you're stitching, everything fits perfectly and there's no gathering in the actual sleeve head. So you don't see any gathering here. It's just kind of gathered up top to kind of pop the sleeve out over your cap, and it gives you a little bit of ease there. Well, in order for the lines to match up nicely the way they should, we're putting the ease in here instead. So it's a little funky, but this is a broad shoulder anyway. There's technically supposed to be shoulder pads in this, and I didn't put the shoulder pads in. So there's actually plenty of ease already put in for wearing. And by putting the ease stitches in this part, we're going to make this part match up to the back princess seams and make it look nice. And you'll still have plenty of ease. So this actually will end up having some tiny little gathers underneath, but normally when you do an easing, you won't. So I just want to say that ahead of time because it's not normal. I think it was a little bit of a mistake in the pattern, but I think that is a nice, easy way to fix it. And actually, like I said, when I watched that video, she mentioned doing the same thing. So I don't think I'm so off base. So this is an undersleeve. This is the main sleeve. I've got one sewn already. I'm just going to show you how I sew them here. Just like the other pieces, we kind of line up the edges, line up the markings, and we're going to stitch it at 5/8 of an inch. And these are not interfaced. So again, it's cuddle on cuddle. I might bump up the stitch length to like a 3.3, 3.5, just to kind of get it through. When I'm using the interfacing ones, it seems to work well at a 3.0, 3 millimeter stitch. So Just kind of getting this all filled in with pins, and then we'll stitch this. And then I'll put the gathering stitches in here so that we can fit it in the coat nicely. There it goes. All right, so I'm going to stitch this at 5/8 of an inch. My seam gauge is off a little bit. Let's mark that back up at 5/8 of an inch. It can be tricky to get it to line up. Sorry. There we go. All right, that marked. We will stitch this down. And this just stitches nicely. Nothing too crazy here. There is technically some ease in this part, but I feel like the cuddle not being interfaced, it actually, if you go nice and slow and you use the by any tool, it sort of works itself out without having to do the gathering stitches in it. What I'm doing is I'm making sure that everything is flat where the needle is hitting and kind of helping the fabric in the seam allowance get through. So I'm not really pulling where the needle is going, but I'm pulling on the edge there, only because I know that ease was factored in. It says it on the pattern piece. And easing is just where you normally would do a little gather stitch, and it's a fit thing. But cuddle is so flexible that you don't really need it in there. You might want to do it in the lining when you're doing the lining sleeve, because the satin is a little less flexible. On these ones, I did not bother to do that step. All right, almost there. All right, so since it's a two-piece sleeve, we have one more seam to go on the sleeve. But before I do that seam, I want to bump up my stitch to my largest stitch length, which is a 5 millimeter, and I'm just going to run a basting stitch here. Remember, this is where we're going to gather slightly so that it matches to fit the back, that princess seam in the back. And I'm doing this just at about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, not back stitching because I'm going to use this to gather. When I gather with Cuddle, I typically do 2 or 3 lines of stitching, but with this, it's not really, I don't want a real gather to show. I'm not trying to really gather the fabric. So one little line should be enough to pull it in enough to work well. So now this is the underarm seam. I'm just going to match it up and make sure not to catch those gathering stitches in it. And we'll pin this one up and stitch it just like the others. Again, using the diagonal stitching. I mean, not stitching, diagonal pinning, I should say. All right. So I know this video is going super long. Thank you guys for hanging. It's just coats take a while. Everything is, yeah, just like Susan said, patience. I mean, it's just about patience. I'm trying not to rush too much through the steps because it seems so complicated and it seems hard, but really it's just time. It's just time and patience. It's a lot of the same type of stitching. I should have probably done a few more step outs and sewn some of this stuff beforehand, but there were some steps I wanted you to see. Like I did want you to see this sleeve. I did the other sleeve already, but I wanted you to see this sleeve going in. So things just take a little bit of time, but it'll all be worth it. Coats are so rewarding. I'm going back down to a 3.5-ish stitch, 3.2, because I'm sewing cuddle to cuddle. And stitching this side seam here of the sleeve. And remember, you can always come back and watch this video most of these tips actually apply to any coat pattern, not just this simplicity one. Like I said, I have many children's coats patterns on my site, but and they come together in much the same way. Adults just have longer seams, right? Oh yeah, someone's asking about a serger. I don't use a serger at all on coats, and I use a serger a ton with Cuddle. But with a coat that's lined like this, you don't need a serger, and all that's going to do is bulk up your seams because you've got all those stitches in there. When we get to the lining, which is very soon here, I am going to show you I did serge one little part, but I always say the nice thing about coats, a lined coat like this, is you can sew it with your basic sewing machine. You do not need a serger, you don't need a cover stitch, you don't need anything fancy. You just, your basic machine can make a coat. But I'll show you where I did use the serger, and you could just use a zigzag stitch on your machine too. But there's one little part where it made sense to me, but the rest. All right, so normally I would press all this stuff really well. You know me and the pressing by now. I press, 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 press. But Cuddle does work really well, you know, if you just kind of finger press it. So one thing I'll say is I did already press up these hems, just the same way I'd done all the rest of them. So that's clip those stitches. And that's going to be important because we want that memory fold in there. We want that hem to look crisp, because just like the hem, these sleeve hems are going to have the lining shorter and kind of bagged over. So you want that crisp hem there so it knows what to do. All right, so that's important. All right, now we're going to insert this sleeve into the coat. Let me grab the coat. Push this back a little bit. Things get bigger and bigger and bigger. We're just... All right, so we're going to do... We have the line at the wrong side of the main coat facing us right now. And we're going to insert the sleeve. We're going to flip the sleeve to right side out. And remember, we've got this underarm seam here. And then this part here, this undersleeve, is what will match up with the back. So you want to make sure you've got the right sleeve in the right spot. See, this would match up with the front. And that's one thing that's easy to note, is that the front has the interfacing, the back doesn't. So this step is a little bit easier here, where you can kind of see clearly front, back. So this sleeve here, this back section needs to match up with the back. So I start by matching the underarm seams first. There's an underarm seam here that I'm holding in my hand, and then the underarm seam here. I'm pushing the sleeve right into this hole, matching those two seams. See that? So that's the side seam of the underarm and the underarm seam of the sleeve. And I'm going to match those two up. They're flat. They're both pressed open. So I'm going to match these two up. Now, it would be a lot easier to stitch having the opening and stitching along here and just having the opening go along your machine. However, I always like to have the sleeve on the plate because the feed dogs help ease the sleeve in. So it ends up being a little bit awkward when you sew it, but I like to pin on the outside and have the sleeve down. It's a little bit easier when you've got the bigger sizes, you got more of an opening, but if your machine has any trouble with it, you really could do it the other way. I just prefer the sleeves because of the same reasons I was talking about before, where the ease, I always like that part to be on the bottom. So I'm just sort of matching some things up. Again, this sleeve is not totally correct, so it doesn't match with all the dots the way it should. So I'm doing the front part now, which doesn't really truly match up with anything. So I'm just kind of being careful and not stretching anything, just kind of trying to match it up nicely. When we get to the back, I'll show you how I use those gather stitches, the easing to ease it in. Now the sleeve head does have some ease in it, so that's where I'm just a little bit careful to not pull anything too tight. we want, so the struggle that we're doing is this is the back princess seam, and we want that to match this sleeve under. So we want those to match up nicely. So you can feel the seams under my fingers. It's hard to see, but I'm feeling them under my fingers, and I'm putting a pin there. So we really want those two to match up nicely. That just looks nice. Again, even with the Vienna, and it kind of hides the seams, I think when you're wearing it, it will kind of show a little bit more, and I think it's nice to just match those up. So now I'm filling pins in, sort of filling in all the way around. And then now I'm lifting the coat up and letting it fall. I'm trying to get the weight and not twisting it into a big ball as I go. But you still want the weight on the table. So now you've got this section here that needs to fit into this smaller section in order for those to meet nicely. This ease really should be at the top of the sleeve head, as we mentioned, but it's down here now. So now you will use those gather stitches to actually gather. So I pull just the bobbin thread. I think it's this one. And I'm going to pull it slightly until it's going to meet. And again, there will be some gathers in there, but it's not going to be too many, and it'll be on the underarm, and that you won't notice. And I think I would sacrifice having a few of these little gathers to having those seams meet up, especially if you were making it not out of Cuddle. But I think even with the Cuddle, it's just nice to have a coat especially when you're making a nice coat like this, you're taking so much time to make it. It's good to have that done correct. All right, there we go. So Cindy is asking about using a slight zigzag stitch so that the seams don't pop. And earlier I did mention that I am just using a straight stitch right now. Most of that is for speeds because it does take about 2 to 3 times as long to do that stitch, and I'm trying to speed up here. So especially the parts that aren't interfaced, it probably would be good to do the lightning bolt stitch, the stretch stitch, or a slight zigzag, so that the weight of the coat doesn't mess anything up. But I'm going to wing it with a stretch stitch. I think it's going to be fine. This fabric is not as heavy as it looks. It does look so, it looks very, very heavy. And it's lush, like it feels good on, but it's not hanging super hard on the seams. So I think we're going to be okay. But yes, that is a good suggestion, and it can help. I wouldn't do a serger because again, that would bulk up the seams, but a slight zigzag wouldn't be a bad idea. And normally, especially with kids' clothing, I always say to do it. But with this one, with these long seams, I didn't want to sit here and have you guys stay even longer watching me do the zigzag stitch. So I'm just kind of going around. I have to keep moving the coat because I don't want it to twist up. You'll see I'm putting my fingers underneath here, not while the sewing machine's moving, but just before, so I can kind of make sure nothing's tangled up underneath. And then using the stiletto to guide it all in. So I'm putting some through, and then I'm stopping, kind of grabbing underneath, trying not to get stabbed with a pin, pulling some over. If my sewing machine had a removable plate here, that would be excellent, because then you could kind of do it in the loop like that. Many do. Mine does not, but I would use that for sure if that was the case. That'd be perfect for this. But instead, I kind of have to keep moving it over. But I want to keep moving the coat too, because I don't want it to keep getting twisted, because then that just is going to pull the seam in the wrong direction. And I don't want to do that. That's what you definitely don't want to pull. All right. Getting there, guys. All right. This around. And those gather stitches at the end, I usually pull them out. If you didn't, it wouldn't be the end of the world. it's not within, it's within the seam allowance, so no one would ever see it, but I like to just take them out just because it's, you know, anytime I can get rid of some bulk, I feel like it's a good idea. This again is a great place with this for this laser because it's hard to see the edge with the nap kind of hangs over, but I can see on top of the fabric where the laser's pointing, I can see the edge of the fabric. So as long as I pinned it nicely and the bottom is lined up with the top, I can tell by the top what's going on. So the laser sight makes a big difference, or laser guide, I should say. Almost all the way around. All right, now let's take a look, see if we need to fix anything. Trim my threads. Let's go. Can't see what I'm doing. All right. Let's go. So now this is all where it should be smooth. See, it's smooth and nothing's caught. It's a little bit caught there, but I can finger that out. So that worked. I didn't have to change that, but I could. And then this is where it's kind of gathered, and it is going to be gathered underneath, but that's okay because again, we did that on purpose. We're trying to get it to line up. So that part's okay. Now I am just going to take out that slight gather stitch. Let's see. Try one more time, and if it doesn't come, we'll just leave it in. Sometimes it gets really tight in there. Oh, here we go. It's only in the one side. Nope, it didn't really pull up. That's okay. I'm just going to leave the rest of it in, not hanging anything up. We'll trim that one. I mean, with all the bulk of just the nap, nobody's going to notice leaving a gather stitch in there, one piece of thread. But anyway, okay, so that sleeve is done. Let's see, kind of see. Seam looks nice. Oh, it's so soft, you guys. Oh, I have to put it back wrong side out because I just will pet that all day. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to just throw this other sleeve in. It's already made. It's already got the hem pressed up. I'm going to throw it on the other side just the same way. And then it's time to sew the coat together. Getting down to it, guys. You know, this is such a long video, so thanks for hanging. See, coat sewing takes a while, but nothing's been too hard so far, right? Yeah, anyone that missed it, that basting stitch, it's just in this under sleeve part, and it's really, I'm using it just to fix a slight mistake in the pattern so that things line up nicely. Normally you wouldn't pull that to a basting, like an actual, I mean, to a basting, to a gather like that, but it's going to look fine. And we all make mistakes. I'm sure there's been a mistake in one of my patterns before. So let's push that there. I'm just going to pin around really quick. And again, I'm pinning on the coat side, not the sleeve side, so that the sleeve itself can be flat against the sewing machine. And it'll help ease in the fit of the top of the sleeve cap to be against the feed dogs. I always try to do it that way. And Cuddle's so forgiving with that type of thing. That stretch, that subtle stretch that it has, you know, is so beneficial for that. Don't have to worry. You can kind of fake seams that aren't working right with Cuddle anytime. All right, so this is back to where that basting thread is. I'm going to match up this princess seam and the undersleeve seam, which is what we're going through all this rigmarole for. So I want to make sure those look nice. Get this in. All right. Pull up the basting stitch. All right, here we go. So I know some of you have said where you are. I saw some Ohio's, some Michigan. I think I saw Wisconsin. I'm in Maryland. We're having some beautiful weather. It's gotten chilly finally, but my goodness, we've had 70s and stuff all fall. This has been the most bizarre fall. We're supposed to get a frost tonight for the first time. I'm in Montgomery County, Maryland. A couple people near us have gotten a frost already, but a couple of weeks ago, but we missed it. I mean, normally that's unheard of to be this far into November and not have a frost yet. My tomatoes, I still picked fresh tomatoes last week in the garden. So we got Wyoming, Iowa. Let's stitch this one real quick. But yeah, I think the garden's done for the year, or just the season. Well, the year, I guess, right? It's almost the end of the year. Using the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Just gonna stitch this around the same way we did this last one. I kind of like to start at the underarm seam. I don't know why. I just feel like I like to start and stop seams at a seam. In case anything's ugly, it's kind of under the arm and no one sees it at the end, but that's just sort of what I always end up doing. I don't think it's a problem if you start or stop somewhere else. That's just, we all have our little habits, right? And again, I'm just sort of feeling underneath, making sure I'm only getting the one layer underneath and not bunching over, other than those small spots where there were gathers. That spot I want to match up nicely. Sometimes you gotta feel with the stiletto, feel where those seams are, because it's so fluffy right here, you can't even see what's going on. Right. All right, we're getting there, guys. I know Sally says she's excited to see the finished coat. Me too. It's going to be so pretty, I think. We're getting there. This is when the bulk of the coat, it starts to get a little bit heavier. I want to make sure that's not catching that seam under there. It might be doing it. And I'm not putting my finger under there when the thing's moving, and I'm being careful that the needle is down. I have my machine set to have the needle stay down when I'm sewing clothing, because it is nice to have it, like, now it's secured in there. I don't have to push it in. It does mean I have to turn the wheel out if I'm done with the stitching, but with this kind of thing, if it stayed up when I'm trying to move things around, everything shifts. And so for me, it's worth it to just have to turn it when I'm releasing the fabric, to be able to keep that needle secure, especially when you're going through these bulkier processes. So that's actually something I should have mentioned before, that needle is in there when I'm pulling all this fabric. And I'm trying to be careful not to pull where the needle actually is either, not, because sometimes if I pull too hard, my needle itself shifts. And you don't want that to happen either, because then you can accidentally break a needle or wreck the faceplate. Almost all the way around. All right. trim my length there. Well, let's look and see if we have to fix anything. Sure, it's all good. That's good. Good. That's where the gathers are. All right, we're good. Just see if I can pull this gathering stitch out. Oh, that one went out easy. Good. Okay, so now it's on the floor, but the main coat is all stitched together. It fell off the table. All right, so normally I might take a minute and kind of press some things into place. I would press the seams out toward the sleeve. Oh, actually, you know what? No, yeah, out toward the sleeve. Out toward the sleeve in this case. Sometimes you want to press them in depending on what you're making. It kind of like changes the shoulder, but this one you would press it out. All right, again, this pattern itself is supposed to have a shoulder pad. I'm skipping the shoulder pads. I think this fabric stands up great on its own and doesn't need it. Let's jump ahead to putting the coat to the lining. So I already have the lining done, this gorgeous silky satin, the sleeves in place. It's got the collar on and it has the front facing. Because as you wear it, that collar is what flips out and over. And then the facing is where the lapel is and it kind of faces out and then eases down. So you need the main fabric on those. The thing I did differently on this is that they had an opening for turning on the center back seam. And that's often the case. I decided I don't like having it here because I don't like having to do the hand stitching right where it's going to be so visibly seen. Like anytime this coat is hanging up, you see that back seam. And I think you have to make your stitches look so nice if you do it that way. So I left the opening in one of the sleeves. Where is it? Here it is. In one of the sleeves. So let me put it right back wrong side up. So this is the only place that I used my serger, and I happen to have purple thread just because it's what was in there. So I didn't serge this seam together, but I serged both sides of the silky satin on just this one sleeve, because as we're going to be turning through this hole, I don't want that silky satin to like fray like crazy. I don't want it to get ruined at all, and I don't want it to move around. So I just did a serger stitch on that. Now you could easily do a zigzag on the edge, but I would take the time on this one sleeve and do that so you don't have a bunch of threads or that raw edge unraveling. So what I did here is you'll do a stay stitch where the opening should be on each side, so that way you know where to grab later for turning. For sewing the seam up. And then I just did that L-shaped stitch. So I started here and stitched out, and then started here, pivoted, and stitched out. And what that does is it makes the opening, once you've turned everything through, the opening wants to close up and lay flat. So when you go to stitch it later, you've got the stay stitching in there, and then you've got the brackets. This way we do the if you've ever done one of our infinity scarves, the Shannon instructions, it's the same kind of thing. That L bracket just helps turn everything inside. So that's the only thing I did differently on this than for the pattern, I think. So you would just follow the pattern instructions for making the lining, very, very similar to the main. So now we are going to attach them together. Sorry, let me clip these threads. Anytime I see threads, I just got to clip them. They drive me crazy. All right, so we've got, that's the bottom of the coat. Trying to get this where I can show you. Okay, so let's start at the collar. All right, we got the collar here. This is the under collar that's attached to the main coat. And then I'm going to put the lining on top of it. This is the upper collar that's going to be matched up. All right, so all we're doing is now matching notches and dots. So we're going to match up I make a notch in the center back. It wasn't actually on the pattern piece, but I always do just because I like to know where the center backs are so I can line them up easy. I don't have to do it as I go along. That's getting matched up with that center seam of the pattern piece 10, that undercollar. And then we've got a notch here. It's going to match a notch there. And then the sweater's caught on a pin. There we go. There's a dot and a dot that match up. So we'll match those up nicely. Go. And then like that dot and that dot. Let's see, so let me just double check that I'm doing that I have all of them. Let's see. Okay. I'll fill in this part with pins and then go to the other side. And we're stitching to there, and then we're going to stitch up and around afterward. Someone mentioned that that's a lot of bulk to be pulling through the sleeve. It is, but I left a really wide opening. There were 2 notches on that sleeve pattern anyway. That was kind of saying where the ease was. And I had no problem pulling that whole coat right through. It came right through, no problem. And again, if the bulk of the coat was going to affect that seam at all, I wouldn't want it to happen on the center back seam because it's so visible. If it did stretch out the seam or did anything crazy to it, if it's in the lining of the sleeve, it's kind of hidden and nobody's even gonna see it. It didn't. The stay stitching and that little bit of serging on the edge helped with fraying. And again, is a big enough opening. It's quite large. I normally do my hand size, and this one I did much bigger than my hand size because I was worried about the bulk of that big coat getting through. So we're just matching up the same dots on this side as we did on the other side. And then we're going to stitch this down. So we're just going to stitch from this dot all the way around to that dot, and then we'll snip, and then we'll go around to the front, I think. Hold on. Hold on. Let me think here. Before I stitch this, I want to make sure I have this on right, because now it feels like something is off. That's the top to that. So those are right. Stitch to that. Sorry, I just like to double check. I don't like to that. And then that's going to go to that. Perfect. Okay. Yep, I had it. Sorry. Sometimes you have to do like these mental gymnastics with these parts. They're not hard. It just can be tricky. If you're not, because I wasn't looking at the instructions, if you're not following like the specific instructions, we're just doing from this dot around to the other one, and then it'll make more sense to get up and around the lapel. All right. Sorry, this is. Make sure I'm at 5/8 of an inch on that gauge is a little bit off. There we go. All right. Stitching in. All right, we're almost there, guys. A bit of pivot. And again, I have my stitch up to about a 3.4 here. It's getting bulkier, so I want to make sure it's getting through this cuddle all right. It does have interfacing here, so it's actually interfacing on both sides. So I'm not worried about the stitch popping. It's just more the bulk. There's thickness from having the two interfacings. Right. I know the coat's probably getting in your way of even being able to see, but that's okay. Probably sounds like a thunderstorm outside, but I think that's my husband rolling the recycling cans back down the driveway. All right, let's just cut home. Okay, I'm going to clip these threads. And again, I always just kind of look on the bottom, make sure. Hold on, I think I know what I did. That's weird. Because that is supposed to go all the way to there. That's why. I'm going to undo just this part of the seam. See how I followed this interfacing? I should have actually stitched this corner here. The interfacing is cut off so it's not bulky in that corner, but I didn't match this dot. That's what I was missing. I knew I was missing something and that was confusing me. So I need to just stitch right there like that on both sides instead of diagonally like this. So that'll just take a second to fix, but I knew that something weird was happening there. So you just got to double check these things and stop now before you get any further, because it's super easy to fix this here. I mean, these stitches will release easily, especially because there's interfacing. So you can really see those stitches easily. So that's not a problem there to get those undone. Whereas if it was just the cuddle, it would be hard to see because it's such a dark color cuddle. But I'm just going to release these stitches so that we get out to that corner. That's going to give that nice collar look. And I'm glad I caught it now. I just felt like something was off there. Right? Brain was telling me something. But you do snip off that interfacing so that's not bulky in that corner when you're trying to press it out. So that's why the interfacing was that shape. So my brain automatically was using that for the seam guide instead of the outside edge. But again, this isn't a major mistake. There we go. That's released. I'll just pin this back in and we'll get right into that corner. Knew there was something going on. There we go. And we're going to go right out to this corner and pivot at that dot. All right, let's get in there. Yeah, a scalpel is great for removing the stitches. You're right. Because that was interfaced, it made it a lot easier to see. But if it wasn't interfaced, I would have been hunting the scalpel down because it is not easy to see to tear out stitches in Cuddle, right? There we go. Then I'm going to pivot and just meet that line where it was. Perfect. I'm going to do that on the other side too, because I think I did the same thing on the other side. My eyes were tricked on the other side too. So I think so. All right. Yep, I did the same thing over here. So I'm just going to take those stitches out and do the same thing really quick. Pinning at the dot first because I just want to be able to hold the seam together while I'm taking this part out so the whole thing doesn't just pop open. So pop right out. It's usually even easier to get the basting stitches out. I'm not basting, sorry, the bobbin stitches usually pop out a little bit easier. So if you pull it from the back, it's usually a little bit simpler. All right, almost there. All right, almost to the edge. And we'll stitch that back up nicely the way it was. So someone's saying the lining and the interfacing seems scary. I mean, it all kind of seems scary if you haven't done it before. The lining is the silky satin, and it's a little slippery, but I will tell you, for a lining fabric, which is what we're using it for, it's very nice. It's really, all you need to do is pin it a bunch and it'll stay right in place. I didn't have any issues sewing with it. I haven't used it a lot. Obviously I've used Cuddle a ton, but the silky satin is a Shannon product, and I've used it in a couple blankets and really liked it, but I haven't used it for linings. Normally in my kids' coats, I actually use C3 for a lining, which may sound strange, but it's not as bulky as you might think it would be, and it keeps the kids super warm in the winter, and they love it. And obviously the texture, like they love that feel of the C3. But I think in an adult coat, it might be a little too much C3. I think it might be better off with the silky satin. Plus, now that I have sewn with it, it is just so easy to sew. As long as you pin a bunch. Okay, so that part's done, all fixed, much more of a real collar shape. I am going to trim these corners right up to the stitching, and I kind of shape them a little bit here too, because that's going to be a corner there. And you don't want all this bulk into that corner. So you don't snip the stitching, you just kind of are shedding some of this. It's going to kind of get everywhere. But let's just pull all that off. Do it to the other side too. Just try to do the best you can not to make a giant mess. Sewing machine, I mean, a vacuum is good here too. But it's Cuddle. We're going to make a little bit of a mess, right? All right. And it'll be on the inside of the coat all sealed up eventually. Okay. So now do the rest of this. All right, so now we've got the collar, that part done. Now we're going to match this seam. Let me see if I'm supposed to clip it. Let me make sure I'm not supposed to clip it before we do anything else. Nope, not clip it. All right. Okay. I'm going to push the machine back just for a minute so we can see what's going on here. This is the front and the facing edge here. We want to sew this whole edge. It goes up to, this is where that lapel is, this point. So there's a dot here right at the edge of the interfacing. Then I'm going to match up with the dot right here on the edge of the interfacing. Again, the interfacing here is trimmed so that it's not in there's no bulk in the actual point. Oh, sorry, C3 is Cuddle 3. It's the solid Cuddle that is 3mm pile. I'm used to calling it C3. Sorry about that. So now we're going to snip this seam here to the dot, and then that gets released. So this is the facing, this is the lining. This dot here is going to match up with the dot we just sewed there on the collar. It's all sort of looking a little crazy here because you've got this fluffy edge kind of hiding all the stuff back there, but trust me, all the notches and the dots are lining up. Just see. That's there. And that's there. Yeah, everything's lining up nicely. And stitch. Just want to make sure that, there we go, that gets pulled up here. Sorry. My fingers are not catching it right. There we go. It gets pulled up there. There we go. All right. Now this front edge here, we've got a notch to match up. Thanks for staying with me, guys. This is a long, long one. But I think it'll be worth it to see this coat come through and be birthed, right? So we're just pinning down this front. It's the facing and the front of the coat. Match up this end. We're going to stitch all the way from one end to the other. Just kind of lying this flat to find middles and then fill in with pins along the way. Oh yeah, we all make mistakes, right? I mean, that's the point of it being live, right? See the mistakes and see how you fix them. Because nobody can sew without a seam ripper or scalpel, something to take out stitches. We all make some sort of mistakes, especially because this one's not my pattern. So I'm trying to pick, trying to remember the steps without looking so closely at them. And that's when you start to make the mistakes. All right, so I'm going to stitch this back to that other dot where we were before, up and around. Let me fix this, put this back onto the 5/8. I keep bumping it because I'm trying to pin here in front of it. Let's put this back to the 5/8 mark. Oops. I'm stitching again with that more than a 3 millimeter stitch length. 3.3, I think is what I'm going to do. You can kind of have a feel for it, see what's working for you with the bulk of the fabric. Just trying to guide this through. These pins keep catching on my sweater. So I'm definitely glad I shortened this. I shortened this coat to be about 10 inches shorter than the main cherry cola one I made, so that the seams would be less to show on camera. And I'm glad I did, because even these ones seem long at this point. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to sew up to this dot at the point where the lapel is, then pivot. Remember, my needle's down still. Trying to make sure my fingers on the bottom are making sure nothing is moving out of the way. There we go. That should make a nice point there. is a little bit bulky here, but we're sewing now to this point. We kind of, not really pivot, but we're just kind of shifting the fabric. Not a full pivot here, it's just shifting the bulk out of the way. And I know you can't really see this right now. It's sort of layering on the machine, but we're almost back to where we started. Almost. There we go. All right. Turn down here. All right, so this point of the lapel, we're going to trim so that it can look nice and pointy. Trim both sides. Kind of at an angle here. Just trying to get it so that when we turn it in, it's not going to be a perfect point anyway, just because it is Cuddle, and the Luxe Cuddle is so thick, but it'll give the shape of a lapel. You'll know what it is when you see it, which is what it's, that's the key. That's what we're aiming for, right? It's for it to look like a nicely shaped lapel. So here I'm just trying to make sure anything's notched that needs to be notched, or not notched, clipped. All right. So we're getting a little messy with the Cuddle. Normally here I would be, vacuuming everything, and I try to keep it pretty clean. I'm going to turn just this part so you guys can see what that looks like before I sew that other side. Stick my hand up in there and just turn it out and kind of shape it a little bit. This is, we just kind of use like one of the little turning point tools. This one doesn't have quite as sharp of a point, so sometimes I'll use, let's see, like I have this turning tool that I'm not actually turning anything with, I'm just kind of using it to press out the point. So it can be hard to situate ourselves at this point. Let's see. Trying to turn all the points out right here so we can see them all. I have my hand inside of the coat and not the tool. All right, so start to kind of see the shape there of the lapel and where the collar is. So we got that's the top of the collar there. And that's where they meet. And this is that point where the lapel sticks up. And we can press that all nicer later, but let's just stitch that other side really quick. And you don't need to turn all that back under. So this side, I'm just going to stitch this side together real quick. Not stitch, first I have to pin it and then I'll stitch it. It's up. All right, guys. Oops, there it goes. Make sure you've got a decent surface when you're doing this. I normally can kind of turn around and use this big cutting table, like you see that pink mat. It's a nice big cutting table I have, and I normally can use that to do the pinning part. It's great for doing like a big Luxe Cuddle throw. And then turn around, and my sewing machine is usually back there on the table, kind of near where the pressing station was. Speaking of which, I realized my iron had turned itself off. It's been so long since I pressed anything, so I wanted to make sure I put it back on because I may press something at the end. So I normally can carry this bulk back to my machine, but I'm kind of sharing the space right now. So just pinning up the facing in front again, just like the other side. I'm going to pin right up to that point, and then we'll cover it in dust here, right? Find that lapel point, stick a pin in there. Make sure I've got that nice. Both sides. And again, if it was a different type of fabric, it would really have a specific point there. The cuddle's not going to be quite as pointy, even though I trim it there. When I'm looking over at the cherry cola coat now, and you can definitely tell it's a pointy lapel, but it's a little bit rounded there. But you still want to get it sewn at a tight point, because otherwise you're really not going to have a point. It's going to be worse. So you still sew it the same way. Okay, go over here. We gotta line up these guys. To there. So that could lie flat. That's where we start. Yep. Stitching there. This is where I'm talking to myself again, because I'm just making sure I've got all these circles meeting in the right spot. So we don't make any more mistakes, right? We'll see. We'll see. This is just where it gets a little bit bulky and gotta go slow. All right, that's ready to go. We're gonna stitch this down. Start where we stopped before when we were doing the collar. So it was interesting when I was sewing this pattern. It is very well designed. Like, it's a great coat pattern. You get picky as a designer what features people do and don't do, and I really think they did a great job with this one. Just the couple tiny odd things like that sleeve issue, but that's no big deal. It was easy to fix. But the dots line up, I have all the notches all lined up, all that. It's a good pattern. Well designed. Okay, we're almost done with that. Now, clip that. This. I'm going to trim that lapel again just to make sure nothing's bulky in there. Make sure I met everything nice, nothing's left open. Don't want any holes anywhere. Good to go, I think. Just trim this off. Sorry. Give me a little haircut. I just want that little point to look nice. Just clip in there too. Anything that feels like it kind of needs to be released, you can kind of clip there. You can usually tell like something feels like it's needs to be released, and then that's why we've done the reinforced stitches, so you can kind of clip do a few clips in there and it doesn't affect anything. Let me check real quick what they have you do next. All right, that, and then that. All right, so way back in the beginning, we added this 1.5 inch mark to the front facing. And that's where we're going to sew the front facing and the front together on the lower edge. And what that's going to do is it's going to help make the front facing meet, I should probably pin this, meet the hem later when the hem turns around. I'll just pin this. See what's this. So let's stitch that across. You're stitching on this line now. We're not stitching using the seam guide. We're stitching on the line. I'm not putting a ton of pins because this really is pretty sturdy right here. All right. Okay. It says to trim that edge, but I'm not going to trim the whole edge. I'm going to kind of like cut up here and trim. I don't want to lose any of that in the hem later on. So kind of pull that out. I gotta refill my bobbin. That's the other thing is you do use a lot of thread. I just filled my bobbin this morning. Fill that really quick. Oh, you know what? I don't. It just snagged. That's good. I was surprised. You do often have to place a bobbin, but this time I did not need to. That's good. Just rethread. All right. Okay. There we go. All right, so we did that. Let me clip to my things. Let me do the other side, stitch across that facing. Like I said, it's nice now just to have that marking on there and not have to do it because it can be confusing to think like, wait, now what am I doing now? So you just know that that's what you're doing. You see that blue mark calling you and you know that that's what you're supposed to be doing right now. So let's get that in there, stitch right across this one. Again, I didn't use a lot of pins. This is pretty sturdy right here. We're just going straight across, stitching right on a mark. I don't always stand to sew. I have the desk that's behind me that I normally use is a nice one that raises, so it goes up and down. So I do both. I do sit a lot. I just find that if I'm sitting too much, it's nice to stand sometimes. So yeah, a little bit of both. My older sister always stands, and I think my younger sister always sits. So we're all different, right? But I like having the table that I can move up and down, that I can adjust. Because if I'm doing something like a coat where I'm going from pressing to not pressing to pressing to not, back and forth, where I have my pressing table is right there. Sorry, my thing just cut out for a second. I want to make sure nothing happened. So it is nice. I can sit and do it all, but it is nice to stand sometimes. All right, so let me see what they have you do now. All right, I am going to show you guys how I'll do the sleeves. I'm only going to do one of them right now, so we're not taking extra time. All right, so got this coat, and it's not turned right side out yet. The whole bottom hem is open still. And we've got the sleeves. So we've got pulling them all wrong side out, okay? Or I'll just start with 2 of them. So we've got, this is a main sleeve, and I've got that hem allowance turned up, okay? And now I'm going straight across the other side of the coat to the lining, and this is the lining sleeve. So everything in between is shoulder. This is one side of the coat. And you got to make sure you've got the right ones because you don't want to get them messed up. So you've got, this is the shoulder, collar, sleeve. So we're going to pull the lining sleeve over and the main sleeve over, and you got to make sure that they're going to meet exact. So like this is the back, that back sleeve seam, and this right here, I've got my finger on it, so I'll remember. And then this right here is the back sleeve seam of the lining. We're going to match those up. We're going across the coat. The coat is still open on the bottom, so that's how this works. What we're going to do is we're going to take, these are going to match up, but we're going to put this lining sleeve inside of the main sleeve where it's turned up. And then where this part is turned up here, you can now unturn it and you can match up the right side. So it's the right sides together here now of these 2 sleeves. I'm going to show you really quick one more time. So you got to make sure it's all matching straight across because otherwise the sleeve will be twisted. But you're taking this seam, and this seam, and you want to match them up, but you're going to flip this one over so it lines up there because this is the wrong side. You want it to go inside. So you're putting that inside to match up with that side. And then you're going to pin it in place. This is just a nice way to finish the sleeve so that there's no hand stitching of the sleeve. Makes a nicely bagged sleeve, like without any hand stitching. So all you're going to do now is just pin this all the way around. So you're closing the entire circle. Put your right sides together, and you will match up that other, like the underarm sleeve. You'll match that up too. You know, both underarm sleeves are there. So you're just taking the circle all the way around. Pinning all the way. You just have a nice little circle that you're stitching on. And it seems weird because you're stitching them together and not leaving an opening or anything like that. But trust me, it works. The pattern has you do this as the last step, and they just have you turn up the hem and have you stitch the lining, hand stitch it onto it. But I like doing it this way better. It's less hand stitching. And I'm just going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. And the reason for that is that there's a 1/2 inch difference between there's an inch difference between the lining length and the main length. And so when I do this 1/2 inch seam allowance, it means that the lining will pull up and in to hide inside the coat sleeve. So the coat sleeve is going to be longer. The main sleeve is going to be longer, but remember that memory fold is going to keep it sitting up, and that lining will pull inside, keep everything nicely tucked away. So it'll look really nice. And you would do both sleeves this way. I'm just going to do the one to show you. The other one will just pretend it's all tucked in so that you guys, because I can go back and do that later. You people on the East Coast, it's getting near to dinner time at this point. I'm on East Coast time. we got this going here. Sorry, I know you can't really see this very well, but I'm just stitching around this entire circle, stitching both to each other. And on this one, I don't think it really matters if the cuddle is up or down or the silky satin is up or down. I don't think that's really going to make a difference here. Okay, so you got this whole big noodle sleeve here, and it all looks crazy, like what is going to happen now? But when you flip the coat right side out and you pull the sleeve through, the lining is nicely tucked up inside there. And where we have that memory fold, it's going to sit nicely. We'll press it again just to make sure, but this lining will just kind of sit in there. So when you put the arm through the sleeve, it all fits nice. So that's a little tip I have for doing the sleeves. And again, I would do both that way, but we're not going to do that today. We're just going to pretend that we did. So now we need to deal with the bottom. Bottom edge. Almost there, guys. Promise. Pull that out. Just kind of pulling everything out. Okay. Main, the bottom. All right. And that sleeve you can do anytime there's an opening still at the bottom, you can do the sleeves that way. I do it all the time, even with like sweatshirts and stuff. If I'm doing a lining, it comes up nicely. So they do this, the bagging a little bit oddly here because there's a vent in the back. And I didn't love what they did, but I think I'm going to do it anyway because actually, I'm just going to do this. This is what we'll do. I just don't want to take up so much more of your time. Let me see. Let me pin one more thing and see if I want to do it this way. Yep, this is what we're going to do. Stuffed up in there. That gets sewn. This goes up. All right, so we're going to sew. This is the very bottom edge. We got the bottom edge of the coat, and there's a vent back here. Like I said, I feel like they did a little more complicated than need to be. So I am just going to pretend that there's no vent right now. You can follow the instructions exactly, but if there wasn't a vent in the coat, we would still bag it the same way on the other end as if there was just one seam here. So I'm going to ignore the vent for right now, just because for the sake of time, that's a lot of time that we would use up on it. So what we are going to do is match up. We're going to take the bottom of the lining and the main, and we're matching up the seams. So we'll start here at the front. This is that facing that we already stitched down. And then we are going to find this seam here. We're going to pin that together. All right, and then find the next seam and pin those two together. Pin those two together. I always pin both sides when they're pressed open because I like them to lie flat. And then we'll stitch this one and then ignore the part in the middle there because, again, it's a little bit funky. I might do something different. When I finish it, I will post in the I Love Cuddle Facebook group. If you guys aren't in there already, you should be. It's a great group. It's called I Love Cuddle, and it's just people sharing what they make with Shannon Fabrics Cuddle, and it's the nicest group. I mean, if you want to feel good about yourself, post something in there, and you just have the kindest comments, and I love seeing what everybody makes, and it's just a great group. But I will post in there when I finish this, so you guys can see what I ended up doing with that vent. Because I might do it differently this time. Like I said, I wasn't super thrilled with, I don't know. I didn't love what they did. In fact, I will tell you in the video on the Simplicity site, they didn't do it that way either. She just skipped it all together, and she just left it open and folded it up and just stitched it closed. So I don't like a coat that's open with the lining open from the main. I like them bagged fully. So I am going to do this, but just making sure I stitch at the right. I think I'm stitching a half an inch seam allowance. And right up to there, stitch. And lower edge coat. Just want to make sure I'm doing this right. Raw lower edge between inner front facing seam. Inner front facing seam. Yep. So from there. Okay. There. Stitch right up to there. So we're going to stitch this across right to where I already stitched that facing down, but I'm only stitching to a half an inch. So those are not going to meet exactly just yet. And again, if this was, let me slide this back a little bit so you can see a little bit. A different pattern, it might not have those vents in the back, or it would have handled them a little bit differently, and then the whole bottom would be sewn together. But let's just do this and I'll show you. Stitching this at a half an inch. We're not using the 5/8 here. Just kind of feeding along here. Right. Okay. Stitch that right over. All right. So we stitch that across. I will trim the seam. All right. So now we have, if this was a different pattern that didn't have this vent in the back, the whole back would be stitched together now. Well, other than the other half I haven't done yet. But now this front facing, there's still a gap here because we stopped at this little dot, and then we stitched that 1.5 and we trimmed it off. Now we're trying to get this bottom hem. We want to be folded up eventually, and we want this lining to be kind of folded up in it. So it's a little bit tricky to picture, and it's kind of, let me think of how I'm going to show it on camera. We're taking that way, and then this tucks into there. So hang on, I'm just trying to picture it before I show you it because I want to make sure I've got it right. They don't really describe the steps super well in theirs. I'm trying to picture the graphic I normally use in mine. They just tuck it up, but I don't like that. Because that's, yeah, sorry, this is where I'm using the memory fold, tucking that up. Yep, and tucking that under. The lining only gets tucked up about a half an inch, I guess. It's not much, but it gets folded over just a little bit. Sorry guys, I'm trying to picture. My brain's not working right now. All right, so we're going to stitch down from there. And the instructions don't say it. That's why I'm having trouble picturing it, because the instructions aren't the same. That's what I'm trying to show you guys. So let's just, I think we tuck that up. I mean, they just stitched there. Hold on one second. Sorry. And they're basically just saying to, they're just like folds are happening in the construction process, but that's not really true. So I think if I do that, it's not going to pinch up nicely. Oh, there we go. So we're trying to stitch, what we're trying to do is stitch this closed. When we stitch it closed, we want the lining, see if I'm explaining to you why we're doing it, then I'll be able to do it. So the lining we want to be tucked under so that it'll stay under when we flip it out. So I think that's it. Let me pin it. We can see. What I should have done is printed out the graphic that I normally have in mind, because then that's folded up there. I want it to end at this fold. I think I don't like that it goes all the way to the edge there. I think that's part of the problem. Sorry, guys. I thought I was going to be better off doing it this way because I didn't love how I did it on the other coat, but now I think I'm forgetting my steps here, so sorry about this. Almost there. I just went a little bit too far over. There we go. All right. Okay, so now that is going to get tucked up. Fold that back. There we go, down to there. All right, let's try this. And then we'll flip and take a look. I want to make sure I'm not catching anything else in the back, because I'm just stitching this little bit here. And we're stitching basically that rest of that front facing seam that was left open earlier. And the reason it's left open is so that you can do this bagging process, but the instructions are a little bit odd. I don't know that this is going to work. Let's see. Let's try it out and we'll see. I may also just post my my illustration. All right, this coat is still open on the bottom because we didn't do that whole thing. So let me just see what it looks like, because I have a feeling it's not going to look very nice. Let me see what's going on here. Actually, it's not too bad. Okay, so this is the bottom of the coat. This is where it's folded up. So this is the hem folded, over. And what we're trying to do is get this corner so that this lining is tucked up and under and hangs over a little bit. See what I mean? And it's kind of just not. It's just a little bunched in there. So I'll have to work on that other side and show you guys how I normally do it. This is just a little bit bunchy and I don't like it. It still will be fine because it's still going to overhang nice. It's still a nice inner lining. I just don't, and this is kind of what it was doing at the vent with their instructions too. So let me look at what I want to do there, and I can post that in the I Love Cuddle group. I could even send the info to Adriana. We could add it to the blog post or something if you guys aren't in that group. But I think it still is going to look good down there. So So this is what we're going to do. We're just going to call it good for that for now. I'm going to tuck up and point out all these points. We're going to skip that vent area and that other side for now, just because I'm not 100% sure what I want to do, but we'll get it all turned out and then show you what it's going to look like. I would like to have finished the whole thing, but I also don't want to just kind of keep you guys here forever because it does get pretty complicated with coats. I'm going to push out this seam. That's that point there. I might come back in and trim it later. And normally I would turn the whole thing through that other sleeve that I left open. But we're not going to do that now. Like I said, I want to get going and showing you how nice it's going to look. And I'll just work on that and can do an update. All right, I've got this point in here from the other side that I didn't point out. That's that lapel point. So let's get that going. And yeah, I mean, this ended up being way longer than our normal lives. We knew it was going to run a little long. I was kind of hoping it wouldn't go quite this long, but it just takes time. And as I got in, some of the things I was going to skip, I didn't want to skip. I just felt like I should tell you guys. So thanks for hanging in all this time. We're probably going to announce the winner pretty soon here because it's been forever. But I'm just kind of turning this all in. I'm not going to press it all right now either. Normally I would come through and I would really press this nicely. And we'd press the very front part nicely. But Adriana, do you want to move to the main camera? I'll go back over there and maybe I'll try even putting it on. All right, let's see. So again, this is not stepped in my trash bucket. Okay, here we go. What do we say? It's not live if you're not making mistakes, right? Okay, so before I try this on, look how gorgeous it's looking. So before I do that, one thing I do want to tell you guys, and I'll go back in and do it afterward. Remember, this bottom is still open, so I can go back in here. One thing you definitely are going to want to do is, this is the neckline of the back main. This is the neckline of the lining. What we want to do is match those two necklines. In between is going to be the collar, but you're just matching those two necklines inside the coat, and you're going to stitch within the seam line just on the very neck. The collar will still pop up and be in there, but then it's not going to be constantly trying to separate when you're wearing it or hang it up. It's not going to be flopping in there. So I just go along within the seam line. That's why I didn't trim these. Remember earlier they were saying to trim these down. I would just pin it together and then stitch within the seam line. So you're not going to see the stitching, but it'll hold it together nice. And then there's some other places that you can tack to. And they mention them in the pattern pretty well, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but you want to tack a few places together, like maybe the underarm of the lining and the main together, because you don't want the coat shifting on you all the time. So let's see. It's not fully pressed. Let me see if I can put it on. One sleeve's finished, the other isn't. Let's see if I can line up these sleeves that aren't finished. Let's see. This is the sleeve that's not finished, so let me go in and find that sleeve. Find the lining sleeve. And I'll do this sleeve the same way we did the other one. There we go. So this sleeve's not finished, so that you'll see the lining hanging out. Just make sure I'm not caught on that. That's also the one with the opening, so I want to make sure I wasn't caught on the opening. All right, so this one actually might fit me. So we've got, it does fit. You can see the back is not done. The lapels, the vents are not done in the back, and it is still open. The pockets are good. I think all the lines are looking nice. Sleeves look nice. Collar looks good. Inside does look nice. We have the one side, that's the side that is not finished. this is the side. So we have this side is finished, but doesn't have the sleeve finished, and the other side isn't. But let me just show you, while Adriana's getting the winner set up, let me show you the lining here of this one, because I did finish this one. You can see a nice bagged lining. It sort of hangs over the edge there. The vent in the back isn't terrible. I don't know. I didn't love how it turned out, so I might do something different. But it came out nice. So the lining does look really nice in this one here. Back up here real quick. Okay, let me see what the situation is. Okay, yep, she's got the winners. So the giveaway winners are Danny Shepard, Denise Vollmer, and Faye Burson-Welch Parkhill. Burson-Welch Parkhill. All right, so you need to just send an email to info@shannonfabrics.com with your shipping info and phone number. And they'll send you 3 yards of this gorgeous Vienna. This is the espresso. I love it. And I am going to finish this. Maybe I'll keep this one. But yeah, thank you guys so much for hanging in all this time. I know this went way longer than we had originally planned. But I appreciate all the comments, and I will figure out exactly what I'm going to do with the hem down here and post the finished coat to the I Love Cuddle group. So join over there. I'll come back and look at some of the YouTube and Facebook questions later and answer anything. But I know Jackie, Susan, Michelle, I'm sure Mary, I'm sure there are a bunch of other Cuddle ambassadors out there that have been answering questions along the way. So hopefully you guys get all your questions answered. Thanks so much for hanging out with us today. Bye.